Tonight we begin a journey, a quiet wandering into the heart of everyday wisdom. There is nothing you need to do, nothing to fix, no one you need to become. Simply allow your body to settle, to be held by the surface beneath you. If this path calls to you, if these gentle whispers of ancient truth resonate with something deep inside, I invite you to walk with us further along this quiet path. Tonight, we meet Kale, a young man who felt a quiet current of unrest, a subtle tugging at his spirit. He lived in a village cradled by ancient hills, where the river sang its endless song, and life unfolded with predictable rhythms. Yet, in the quiet moments, Kale felt a whisper of something missing, a sense that he sought a deeper understanding, a peace that seemed just beyond his grasp. He knew not where to find it, only that it called to him. Let us begin this journey together. Take a gentle breath now, allowing it to fill you, then release it slowly, softly, feeling the gentle rise and fall of your chest. Kyle was a man in his early 30s, lean and thoughtful, with eyes that held a perpetual, gentle question. His dark hair was often brushed back by the wind, and his hands, though capable, sometimes betrayed a slight tremor of inner restlessness. He wore simple homespun garments, a loose tunic and trousers of natural, earth-toned cloth, practical for the simple life he led. He was earnest and observant, always listening more than he spoke, his questions often unvoiced but deeply felt. He was not overtly unhappy, no, but he felt ungrounded, as if floating just above the surface of life, never quite touching the solid earth beneath. His village was a place of familiar comforts, of quiet industry and gentle sounds. In the mornings, the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of Radha's mortar and pestle echoed from the spice-scented clearing, a steady heartbeat to the day. The distant lowing of Gopal's cattle drifted from the pastures as the sun climbed higher, painting the sky with soft golden light. Along the riverbanks, the gentle lapping of water accompanied Yasmin's patient harvesting of reeds, their rustle a whisper in the breeze. The air often carried the sweet, subtle fragrance of flowering plants from the nearby groves, or the earthy scent of damp soil after a soft rain. At dusk, the soft crackle of cooking fires mingled with the constant symphony of birdsong, as deep blues and purples settled over the distant hills. Kyle knew these rhythms intimately. He participated in them. He shared meals with his neighbors, offered help when needed, and moved through his days with the same quiet diligence as everyone else. Yet, as he watched the faces around him, faces etched with the quiet weariness of labor, or softened by the simple contentment of a shared meal, he felt a subtle distance. He saw their peace, a deep, rooted peace that seemed to spring from the very soil they tilled, from the familiar routines they embraced. He saw it, but he could not quite feel it within himself. He tried, in his own way, to cultivate that same peace. He would sit by the river, watching the water flow, clear and cool over smooth stones. He would feel the warmth of the sun on his skin, the yielding softness of the mud between his toes when he walked the paths after a rain. He would listen to the wind whisper through the leaves, a sound as ancient as the hills themselves. He would observe the small, everyday miracles of life, the tenacious green sprout pushing through a crack in the dry earth, the intricate dance of insects in the afternoon light, the quiet patience of a spider weaving its web. These moments brought him a fleeting calm, a momentary respite from the gentle questioning that hummed beneath the surface of his thoughts. But the calm never settled deep enough, never quite reached the ungrounded place within him. It was in these quiet moments, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with hues of apricot and rose, that Cale often found himself gazing at the distant hills. They stood there, silent and strong, their peaks softened by the haze of distance, holding secrets he could not name. An unspoken call seemed to rise from them, a gentle invitation to venture forth, to step beyond the familiar circle of his village. It was a call not of urgency, but of quiet necessity, a feeling that the answer to his unspoken questions lay not in deeper observation of what he already knew, but in a journey into the unknown. He had no map, no clear destination in mind. He did not seek a master on a mountaintop, nor a hidden treasure in a forgotten cave. What he sought was a wisdom that could anchor his spirit, a peace that transcended the fleeting nature of daily struggles. He yearned for a truth that would make him feel whole, connected, truly present in his own life. The yearning was not a loud clamor, but a persistent, gentle whisper, growing steadily louder with each passing day. The decision, when it finally came, was not a sudden burst of resolve, but a slow, quiet blossoming, like a night-blooming flower opening its petals to the moon. One evening, as the last sliver of golden light faded from the sky and the village settled into the gentle hum of night, Cale knew, with a certainty that was both quiet and profound, that he must go. He would follow the unspoken call, would step onto that unseen path. He spent the next morning in careful preparation. He packed a small bag, selecting only what was essential: a change of his simple, earth-toned tunic, a small water skin, a length of sturdy rope, a sharp knife, and a pouch of dried fruit and nuts to sustain him. Each item was chosen with a quiet mindfulness, a recognition that he was shedding the weight of the unnecessary traveling light, not just with his body, but with his spirit. He left behind no note, no farewells, for his journey was too personal, too unformed to be explained with words. It was a quiet departure, as quiet as the unrest that had led him to it. As the first tendrils of dawn light began to paint the eastern sky with soft pinks and oranges, Cale stood at the edge of his home. He took a last, lingering look at the familiar mud walls, the thatched roof, the small courtyard where he had spent countless hours. He listened to the gentle stirrings of the village, the first sleepy bird song, the distant cough of an awakening neighbor. He breathed in the cool, fresh air, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and wood smoke. There was a quiet ache in his chest, a gentle pang of leaving the known, but it was overshadowed by a deeper sense of anticipation, a calm readiness. Then, with a final, slow breath, Cale turned and stepped onto the winding dirt path that led out of the village, past the fields, and towards the distant, beckoning hills. He was a seeker without a map, walking into a world that promised not answers, but experiences, not destinations, but discoveries. The path stretched before him, an invitation into the unknown, into the heart of quiet wisdom. He walked with a steady, unhurried pace, feeling the cool earth beneath his feet, the gentle breeze on his face, and the quiet hum of his own journey beginning. The world around him was vast and silent, waiting to unfold its gentle lessons. The path Cale followed wound through fields of green, past small clusters of homes nestled under ancient trees, and over gentle rises that offered glimpses of the distant, hazy mountains. Each step was new, yet familiar, for the world, though unknown, still hummed with the quiet industry he knew. The air, crisp with the morning's coolness, carried the scent of damp earth and the subtle perfume of wild blossoms he had not encountered before. He saw farmers tending their plots with slow, deliberate movements, their faces serene in the soft light. Children played by a narrow stream, their laughter like the tinkling of small bells. The sounds were different, perhaps, the rhythm slightly altered, but the underlying pulse of life, simple and profound, remained. Kyle walked with an open awareness, his eyes taking in the textures of the landscape, his ears attuned to the whispers of the breeze. But the quiet questioning within him, the gentle tugging, still accompanied him, a silent companion on his journey. It was the scent that drew him first, a rich, complex aroma that wafted on the morning air, growing stronger with each step. It was the scent of spices, warm and pungent, layered with the earthy notes of cumin and the sharp brightness of coriander, the subtle sweetness of cardamom, and the fiery whisper of chilies. He followed the fragrance, which led him to a small clearing, dappled with sunlight filtering through the leaves of a large banyan tree. Here, beneath the generous shade, sat a woman, her back to the tree's ancient trunk, her movements a study in rhythmic grace. This was Radha, the mortar and pestle woman. Her sari, a deep indigo softened by countless washes, draped around her, almost blending with the shadows. Her hands, strong and calloused from years of tireless work, moved with a practiced, almost hypnotic rhythm. A heavy stone pestle descended into a wide, shallow mortar with a soft, steady thud, 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 pulverizing a mound of golden turmeric. Fine dust, the essence of the spice, rose around her, catching the shafts of sunlight and swirling like captured dreams before settling back onto the rough-hewn surface of her grinding stone and the folds of her sari. Kyle found a quiet spot nearby, out of her direct line of sight, and simply watched. He had learned, even in his own village, that much could be understood by simply observing, by allowing the unspoken rhythms of life to reveal themselves. He watched Radha for many mornings. He saw the subtle weariness in her eyes that held a quiet patience, yet also a distant, unarticulated sorrow. Her movements were precise, efficient, but carried a weight, as if each thud of the pestle was not just grinding spices, but also pressing down on something within her, something that yearned to be released. He saw the lines etched on her face, not harsh, but soft, like the gentle erosion of a river stone, testament to seasons of labor, of tending to family, of the quiet, constant pressure of daily life. He saw the way she would sometimes pause, the pestle resting in the mortar, her gaze fixed on the finely ground powder, a look of contemplation, or perhaps a deep, silent sigh passing across her features. The air around her was always thick with the rich, warm scent of spices, a comforting blanket, yet Cale sensed a chill beneath its warmth in Radha herself. He felt a resonance with her quiet endurance, a recognition of a similar, though unvoiced, pressure within his own spirit. He too felt the constant grinding of his own unanswered questions, the subtle weight of seeking a peace that remained elusive. One day, as the sun climbed higher, warming the clearing, Cale approached her, his voice soft as a morning breeze, careful not to disturb the quiet cadence of her work. "Radha," he said, his voice barely a whisper above the rhythmic thud, "your spices hold such strong flavor. Yet, you seem quiet." Radha paused. The pestle rested, its momentum spent. She looked at her hands, strong and dusted with the pale gold of turmeric, then at the finely ground powder in the mortar, so vibrant, so potent. Her gaze then drifted to Kyle, her eyes holding that familiar, gentle weariness. "The grinding is constant, Kyle," she replied, her voice low and steady, carrying the slight rasp of the spices that had filled her lungs for decades. She gestured to the mortar, then to the pile of whole, unground peppercorns beside it, small, dark spheres, seemingly insignificant, yet holding a concentrated fire. "And sometimes, I feel as if I am the one being ground down, until no flavor of my own remains, only dust. Kale sat quietly, settling himself cross-legged on the earth, hearing her words, feeling the truth of them deep inside his own restless heart. He understood her struggle, for he felt a similar pressure, though his was unspoken, ungrounded. His own life, too, had felt like a constant grinding, a continuous effort to find a shape, a purpose, a piece that seemed to slip through his fingers like fine powder. He had tried to crush his restlessness, to grind away his questions, but they always seemed to reform, perhaps in a different consistency, but still there, still heavy. The air was still, only the distant cooing of doves broke the silence, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the banyan above. Radha picked up a handful of the black peppercorns, letting them spill from her palm back into the pile, a soft rain of hard, dark spheres. "These," she murmured, her voice almost to herself, "these are the most stubborn. They resist. They fight the pestle's weight." She often spoke to herself, or to the spices, a quiet conversation that had become part of her daily rhythm. She then reached into a small cloth pouch, tied with a faded string, and pulled out a handful of ancient peppercorns, darker, smaller, more gnarled than the others. "But these," she said, holding them out for Kale to see, "these are truly ancient, passed down from my grandmother's grandmother. They have been ground many times over the generations, yet they remain." She placed a few of these ancient, dark peppercorns into the mortar alongside the turmeric. Kale leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. Radha lifted the pestle, and with a familiar, powerful motion, brought it down. The turmeric yielded easily, turning to a softer, finer dust. But the ancient peppercorns, though small, remained whole. There was no satisfying crack of their shell, no soft crumble. Instead, the pestle met them with a dull, unyielding thump. Radha tried again, adding more force, her brow furrowing with a quiet determination. Thump, thump, thump. Each strike was heavier, more deliberate, yet the small, dark spheres seemed to absorb the impact, rolling stubbornly around the mortar, their surfaces unblemished, their integrity intact. Kyle watched, mesmerized. He saw the subtle tension in Radha's shoulders, the way her grip tightened on the pestle. He could almost feel the resistance radiating from those tiny, ancient seeds. They defied the very purpose of the mortar and pestle. They defied the constant pressure, the relentless grinding that was meant to break them down, to release their essence, to turn them into powder. They simply were. Radha paused, her breath coming a little harder now, not from exertion, but from a quiet disbelief. She picked up one of the ancient peppercorns, rolling it between her thumb and forefinger. It was hard, almost stone-like, yet clearly organic. It smelled faintly of deep, concentrated spice, a scent that hinted at a power that transcended its small size. She looked at it, then back at the mortar, then at her calloused hands, her eyes holding a new kind of wonder, less weary, more illuminated. A quiet understanding bloomed in her heart, a gentle recognition that rippled through her weary spirit. She looked at Kale, her eyes no longer distant, but present, and a soft, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "They do not break, Kale," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet awe. "No matter the pressure, no matter the grinding, they hold their form. Their essence is not released by force, but by a deeper, more patient unfolding." She looked at her hands, then back at the small, unyielding peppercorn. "I thought I was being ground down. I thought the pressure would make me crumble. But perhaps..." She trailed off, her gaze resting on the small, dark sphere, a symbol of quiet, enduring strength. Perhaps there is a core within me too that cannot be broken, a part that, no matter how much is asked, simply remains. Cale felt a sudden, profound resonance with her words. His own restlessness, his quiet discontent, had felt like a constant grinding, an internal pressure to find answers, to achieve a state of peace. He had felt that if he just pushed harder, sought more, thought deeper, he would finally break through to the understanding he craved. But in watching Radha and her ancient peppercorns, a glimmer of insight sparked within him, like a tiny flame in the darkness. Perhaps the wisdom he sought was not something to be found by breaking himself down, by grinding away his perceived flaws or his unfulfilled yearnings. Perhaps, like the peppercorns, his true essence, his deepest peace, was not something that needed to be released by force, but something that already existed, whole and unbreakable, within him. It was a core that could withstand the relentless pressure of seeking, the constant thud, thud, thud of life's demands, and simply be. He had been looking for something external to fill a void, to mend a perceived brokenness. But what if there was nothing to mend? What if he too had an unbreakable core, a quiet resilience that simply needed to be recognized, not created? The thought was a delicate seed, planted in the fertile ground of his questioning mind. It was not a complete answer, not a grand revelation, but a gentle shift in perspective, a quiet turning inward. The world around him still hummed, the sun still cast its golden light, but Kyle felt a subtle change in the air, a different kind of stillness. He watched Radha gather her tools, her movements now imbued with a renewed, quiet dignity. She no longer seemed merely weary, but deeply rooted, like an ancient tree, capable of withstanding any storm. As Cale rose to continue his journey, he carried with him not just the scent of spices, but the quiet image of those unbreakable peppercorns, a tangible metaphor for an inner strength he had begun to sense within himself. The path ahead was still unknown, but now a subtle anchor had been cast, a quiet promise of an inherent resilience he had never before considered. His step felt lighter, his spirit a little less burdened, as he walked away from Radha's clearing towards the next unfolding lesson. Cale walked on, the memory of Radha's unbreakable peppercorns a quiet companion within him. The path wound through fields of ripening grain, their golden heads bowing in unison to the gentle breeze, a silent affirmation of life's cycles. The air grew warmer, the scent of crushed spices gradually fading, replaced by the earthy aroma of fertile soil and distant, drying grasses. The rhythm of his own steps became a meditation, each footfall a soft punctuation in the unfolding silence. He carried the feeling of that inherent, unyielding core within him, a subtle strengthening that had begun to settle deep inside. After days of walking, the landscape began to shift. The rolling hills gave way to flatter, broader plains, dotted with patches of lush green and the darker, more muted tones of grazing land. In the distance, Cale heard a new sound, a low, resonant hum that grew steadily louder as he approached, the deep, ancient sound of cattle. It was a sound that spoke of rootedness, of vast spaces, of lives lived in quiet communion with the earth. He arrived at a wide, open pasture, bathed in the soft, diffused light of late afternoon. A young man moved among the grazing animals, his figure slender against the backdrop of the setting sun. This was Gopal, the cowherder. Cale watched him for a time before approaching. Gopal had a mop of dark, unruly hair, often falling into his quick, watchful eyes. He moved with a diligent precision, his simple, practical clothes stained with the dust of the pasture and the green of the grass. His hands were never idle, sometimes adjusting a rope, sometimes simply tracing patterns in the air as if calculating. Kale observed Gopal's meticulousness. At the edge of the pasture, near a small, rough-hewn shed, Gopal had arranged a series of smooth, flat stones. As each cow ambled past him, heading towards the evening watering hole, Gopal would carefully move one stone from a larger pile to a smaller one, his lips moving in a silent count. He did this at dawn, when the cows were let out to graze, and again at dusk, when they returned. Every day the count had to be perfect. Every single animal had to be accounted for. One evening, as the sky bled from soft orange to deep violet, Kyle approached Gopal. The last of the cattle were slowly making their way back, their lowing a gentle murmur across the darkening field. Gopal was engrossed in his counting, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You are very diligent, Gopal," Kyle said, his voice soft, not wanting to disturb the delicate balance of the count. Gopal finished his tally, moving the last stone with a quiet clink. He sighed, a breath that seemed to carry a subtle weight. He looked up at Kale. His eyes, though watchful, also held a persistent, quiet question, a hint of the unease Kale himself knew so well. "It is my duty," Gopal replied, his voice a little hesitant, as if carefully calculating his words even in casual conversation. "Every animal must be here. Every number must match." He gestured to the two piles of stones, one now empty, the other full. "My father taught me that a good herder knows his flock by heart, yes, but also by count. Numbers do not lie." Kyle nodded, understanding the logic, the undeniable truth of arithmetic. "And does the count bring you peace, Gopal?" he asked, his question gentle, almost an invitation. Gopal paused, his gaze drifting over the dark shapes of the cattle, now settling down for the night, their forms melting into the deepening shadows. A faint breeze rustled the tall grasses, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and warm animal hide. "Peace?" Gopal repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. He ran a hand through his unruly hair. "It brings certainty. It tells me nothing is lost, and yet—" He trailed off, his eyes scanning the field once more, as if searching for something that could not be counted. "And yet, Kale, there is still a feeling, a kind of emptiness, even when the numbers are perfect, a gap that no tally can fill. It is as if I count the bodies, but something essential about them, about their being, about my being here with them, remains uncounted, unseen." Kyle felt a familiar echo within his own heart. He, too, had tried to count the moments of his life, to weigh his efforts, to measure his progress towards some elusive peace. He had felt that if he could just quantify his actions, understand his experiences in clear, definable terms, he would find the answers. But like Gopal, he had found that the numbers, though reassuring in their precision, often left him feeling disconnected from the deeper, living truth of his own existence. His own search had been a meticulous tally of questions, of unmet longings, and the more he counted them, the more he felt their absence rather than their presence. He spent the next few days with Gopal, observing his careful ways. He watched as Gopal led the cows to fresh pastures, as he checked their health, as he mended fences. He saw the young man's dedication, his unwavering commitment to his responsibilities, and always, at dawn and dusk, the ritual of the counting stones. Each cow, a distinct personality to Kale's eyes, was reduced to a unit, a number in Gopal's careful ledger. Kale began to feel a subtle tension in the air around Gopal during these counting times, a quiet anxiety that even a perfect tally could not fully dispel. It was the anxiety of the missing, even when nothing was truly gone. One evening, the sky was unusually dark, thick clouds obscuring the moon and stars. A heavy, moist wind blew across the pasture, carrying with it the distant scent of rain. The cattle, sensing the change, were more restless than usual, their lowing more insistent. Gopal began his evening count, his movements a little more hurried, his usual precision strained by the encroaching darkness and the nervous energy of the herd. Kyle sat quietly by the shed, watching the flickering light of Gopal's small lantern as he moved his stones. One by one, the dark shapes of the cows passed. One by one, Gopal moved his stones. He counted them as they disappeared into the blackness of the night, their forms becoming indistinguishable from the shadows. The wind picked up, whistling through the long grasses. Gopal finished his count, his hand hovering over the last stone. He frowned, his brow deeply furrowed. He counted again, his lips moving silently, his eyes straining into the darkness. "No," he whispered, his voice tight with a sudden sharp panic. "No, it cannot be." He counted a third time, his fingers fumbling slightly with the stones. "One is missing, Kale. One is missing." His voice rose with alarm, a tremor of fear running through it. He dropped the lantern, its light swinging wildly for a moment before settling, casting grotesque, dancing shadows across the field. His eyes, wide with panic, darted into the inky blackness. He began to call out, his voice hoarse, "Ho! Ho! There! Where are you?" But the wind snatched his words, carrying them away into the vast, indifferent night. Kale rose slowly, walking towards the distraught young man. He could feel Gopal's fear radiating outwards, a palpable wave of anxiety. To lose even one animal was a failure, a disruption to the perfect order Gopal so carefully maintained. It was the missing made manifest, the void he always felt now gaping wide open. "Gopal," Kale said, his voice calm, a low anchor in the rising storm of Gopal's distress. "The lantern. Pick it up. Let us listen." Gopal, still trembling, bent to retrieve the lantern, its soft glow barely piercing the heavy darkness. He held it close, his knuckles white. The wind continued to howl, and the cattle, sensing his agitation, stirred uneasily. "Listen, Gopal," Kyle repeated, his voice gentle but firm. "Close your eyes. Listen beyond the wind, beyond your own fear." Hesitantly, Gopal closed his eyes, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He stood there, the only source of light a small circle around him, surrounded by the impenetrable blackness and the vast, unseen presence of his herd. The wind whined, the cows shifted, and in his mind, the number 1 screamed its absence. Then, slowly, Kyle watched as Gopal's features began to soften, the panic slowly receding, replaced by a deep, focused concentration. He leaned forward slightly, his head tilted, his ears straining. The wind's howl began to recede for him. The rustling of grass became less jarring. And then, through the veil of noise, something else began to emerge. A soft, rhythmic sound, a gentle huff, 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 the sound of a large animal breathing, deep and steady. Then another, a little further away, and another. Each breath distinct, unique in its rhythm and cadence, a subtle symphony of living presence. Gopal had heard these sounds countless times before, but always as background, always secondary to the visual confirmation, to the precise count of the stones. But in the utter darkness, stripped of the ability to see, to count, to verify, these sounds became the only truth. He opened his eyes, a profound relief washing over his face, softening the harsh lines of fear. He looked at Kyle, then back into the darkness, his gaze no longer frantic, but settled. "They are here," Gopal whispered, his voice filled with a quiet awe. "All of them. I can hear them. Each one, their breath." He took a deep, shuddering breath himself, as if finally breathing with them, in rhythm with the living world around him. "I was counting bodies, Kyle," he murmured, the words tumbling out, soft and reflective. "Just shapes, just numbers. I was not acknowledging their living presence. I was looking for an absence that wasn't there, because I wasn't truly present to what was here." A quiet understanding bloomed in Gopal's heart, a gentle recognition that rippled through his diligent spirit. He looked at his hands, then at the scattered counting stones, then back at the unseen herd, now listening to the soft murmur of their breaths, a melody of life that needed no tally. He realized that his constant feeling of emptiness, the gap he perceived, was not an actual absence in the world, but an absence in his own perception, a failure to connect with the living, breathing reality that existed beyond the realm of numbers and calculations. Kale felt a profound resonance with Gopal's realization. His own restlessness, his quiet discontent, had felt like a persistent missing, a void that he desperately tried to fill with searching, with questioning, with intellectual understanding. He had been counting his own perceived deficiencies, tallying his unfulfilled desires, and in doing so, he had overlooked the quiet, living presence of his own inherent wholeness. He had been so focused on the number of things he lacked that he had failed to listen to the gentle, rhythmic breath of his own being, the quiet hum of life that was always present, always flowing. Perhaps the peace he sought was not something to be found by adding or subtracting from his life, by meticulously counting what was there or what was missing. Perhaps, like Gopal and his herd, his true essence, his deepest understanding, was not something that needed to be quantified, but something that simply was, a living presence that could only be known by listening, by feeling, by being present to the subtle rhythms of life. It was a core that could not be counted, but could only be felt, a quiet resonance that transcended all numbers. The thought was a delicate melody, weaving itself into the fabric of his questioning mind. It was not a complete answer, not a grand revelation, but a gentle shift in perspective, a quiet turning inward, a deepening of the insight sparked by Radha's peppercorns. The world around him still hummed, the darkness still enveloped them, but Kyle felt a subtle change in the air, a different kind of stillness, filled now with the quiet symphony of living breaths. He watched Gopal gather his counting stones, but now his movements were imbued with a renewed, quiet reverence. He no longer seemed merely diligent, but deeply connected, like a shepherd to his flock, capable of knowing his world not just by sight, but by heart. As Kyle prepared to continue his journey, he carried with him not just the memory of Gopal's relief, but the quiet understanding of that profound difference between counting bodies and knowing living presence, a tangible metaphor for an inner connection he had begun to sense within himself. The path ahead was still unknown, but now, a subtle rhythm had been established, a quiet promise of an inherent depth he had never before considered. His step felt lighter, his spirit a little less burdened by the silent tally of his own perceived lacks as he walked away from Gopal's pasture towards the next unfolding lesson. The stars, now peeking through the thinning clouds, seemed to twinkle with a knowing, ancient light, guiding his way. The stars, now peeking through the thinning clouds, seemed to twinkle with a knowing, ancient light, guiding his way. Kyle walked on, leaving the pasture behind, the quiet symphony of the cattle's breath still echoing in his mind. The path narrowed, winding through fields that gradually softened, the earth growing wetter, the air heavier with the scent of damp soil and growing things. The distant hills, which had once called to him with a vague, undefined longing, now seemed to hold a different kind of promise, a quiet wisdom waiting to be uncovered in the everyday. His steps, once hesitant, felt more certain, less burdened by the unspoken tally of his own perceived lacks. The lesson from Gopal had settled within him, a gentle stone finding its place in the quiet stream of his thoughts. He had been so focused on counting, on quantifying, on searching for what was absent, that he had overlooked the profound, living presence that simply was. His own heart, too, held such a presence, a quiet hum of being that needed no external verification, no careful count. It was a subtle shift, a reorientation not of direction, but of perception. The landscape began to change, slowly, imperceptibly at first. The cultivated fields gave way to wilder grasses, then to stretches of shallow water, reflecting the soft light of the morning sky. Tall, slender stalks began to appear, growing in dense thickets, their green hues deepening, their forms swaying with an invisible grace. He had arrived at the marsh, a place of quiet beauty and constant, gentle movement. The air here was different, cooler, carrying the damp, earthy scent of water and reeds. The sounds were also distinct, the chirping of unseen insects, the occasional splash of a frog, and the constant, soft rustle of the reeds themselves, a whispered conversation carried on the breeze. It was a world of edges, of transition, where land met water in an intricate dance, and there, amidst the swaying reeds, Kale saw her, Yasmin. She moved with a fluid grace like the reeds themselves, her slender frame belying a quiet strength. Her long, dark hair was tied back, and her skin, tanned by hours under the sun, seemed to glow with a natural vitality. She held a cutting tool in her adept hands, harvesting the reeds with smooth, practiced motions, each cut precise and purposeful. Her movements were a silent poem, a rhythm woven into the very fabric of the marsh. Kyle watched her from a distance, hidden by a cluster of taller reeds, observing the quiet intensity of her work. He saw the way her eyes, though focused on her task, seemed to hold a distant, almost wistful look. She was present in her labor, yet a part of her seemed to yearn for something beyond the immediate, something deeper than the shallow waters where she stood. He spent several days in the vicinity of the marsh, observing Yasmin. He would watch her come and go, her basket filling with the harvested reeds, her movements never hurried, always deliberate. He saw her pause sometimes, her gaze sweeping across the vast expanse of the marsh, then towards the distant solid land, and then back to the water. There was a quiet sigh that sometimes escaped her lips, a subtle contraction of her brow that spoke of an unspoken longing. One quiet afternoon, as the sun began its gentle descent, painting the sky in hues of soft orange and rose, Kale approached her. His voice was soft, almost lost in the rustle of the reeds. "Yasmin," he said, "your work here is beautiful. These reeds, they seem to hold a quiet strength." Yasmin paused, her cutting tool resting against her thigh. She turned, her eyes meeting Kale's with a calm, steady gaze. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft, almost reedy, like the whisper of the marsh itself, yet it held a clear, resonant quality. "They do, Kyle," she replied, gesturing to the reeds around them. "They bend, they sway, they endure. But sometimes," she continued, her voice dropping slightly, a hint of frustration coloring her tone, "sometimes I feel as if I am like them, always at the edge, forever in the shallows. Others, she swept her hand towards the distant land. They find depth, they build, they grow in the center. But here, at the edge, it feels like I am always just stuck between the land and the water, between what is firm and what is flowing, never truly belonging to either, never finding true depth. Kale listened, his gaze sweeping across the marsh, then to the distant land. He understood her words, for he too had felt that sense of being at the periphery, of searching for a deeper meaning that seemed to elude him, always just out of reach, like the horizon. He had felt ungrounded, floating just above the surface of life, much like Yasmin felt stuck in the shallows. His own restlessness had been a longing for a center, a solid core, a deep anchoring that he hadn't yet found. Yasmin sighed, a soft, almost imperceptible sound. She turned back to her work, her hands moving again, cutting, gathering. Kyle remained, sitting quietly on a patch of slightly drier earth, simply observing, listening to the gentle rhythm of her work and the soft, constant whisper of the marsh. The frustration in her voice resonated with his own quiet discontent, his own feeling of being an observer rather than a full participant in the depths of life. The days continued in this gentle rhythm. Kyle would watch, Yasmin would work, and the marsh would hum with its quiet life. The sun would rise and set, painting the water in ever-changing hues, and the wind would blow, sometimes gentle, sometimes strong, always moving through the reeds. One particular afternoon, the sky had turned a bruised purple, heavy with the promise of an approaching storm. Yasmin, intent on gathering a particularly dense cluster of reeds, ventured further into a deeper part of the marsh than usual. The mud there was thicker, more treacherous, softened by recent rains. Her feet, accustomed to the familiar ground, suddenly sank deeper than she expected. She tried to pull free, her muscles tensing, her breath catching in her throat. But the mud, slick and clinging, held her fast. She struggled, her movements becoming more frantic, her heart beginning to pound against her ribs. Each attempt to free herself only seemed to pull her deeper, the thick, silty earth sucking at her legs, refusing to release its hold. Panic began to rise in her, a cold wave washing over her quiet strength. She felt truly, utterly stuck. The feeling she'd articulated to Kyle, the sense of being forever at the edges, forever in the shallows, now manifested itself in a terrifying, tangible way. Kyle, observing from a small rise, saw her distress. He started to move towards her, his brow furrowed with concern. But before he could reach her, Yasmin, exhausted by her futile struggle, ceased her efforts. Her body, trembling from exertion, slumped slightly. Her breath, which had been coming in short, ragged gasps, began to slow, gradually matching the quiet rhythm of the marsh around her. The first drops of rain began to fall, soft and cool against her flushed face. She stood there, trapped, unable to move, yet no longer struggling. Her eyes, wide and still, scanned the familiar landscape around her. The sun, now a brilliant fiery orange, dipped lower, casting long golden shadows across the water, illuminating the countless reeds that surrounded her. A gentle wind, a precursor to the coming storm, began to stir, whispering through them, a soft, undulating sigh. And she watched them then, these flexible, slender stalks she knew so well. They stood in the very same mud that held her captive, rooted in the shifting, watery earth. As the wind grew stronger, they bent, gracefully, deeply, almost touching the water's surface, a collective bow to the invisible force. They swayed, yielding to the wind's invisible push, their forms fluid and pliant, but they did not break. Then, slowly, softly, as the wind eased for a moment, they returned to their upright posture, resilient and whole. Again and again, they bent, they swayed, they yielded, and they returned. Yasmin's gaze lingered on them, her mind quiet, no longer filled with the frantic cries of panic. She saw how they thrived in this very place, at the very edge, between solid land and flowing water, where the currents of change were strongest. It was precisely here, in this fluid, shifting environment, that their quiet strength lay. They did not resist the wind. They flowed with it. They did not fight the currents. They grew within them. They were not stuck. They were rooted. And their roots, she knew, spread wide and shallow, intertwining with each other, creating a vast, flexible network that held them steady even as they swayed. Something shifted within Yasmin. A quiet understanding bloomed in her heart, a gentle recognition that rippled through her weary spirit. The reeds were not stuck in the shallows. They thrived at the edge because it was there, in that place of constant change, of perpetual movement between two worlds. That flexibility was needed most. It was there that their quiet strength truly lay. Their apparent weakness, their willingness to bend, was in fact their greatest power, allowing them to endure what rigidity would shatter. She realized her own life, too, was not stuck, not merely on the periphery. She was positioned exactly where strength met change, where the constant flow of life demanded a profound adaptability. Her longing for depth, for a solid center, had blinded her to the inherent wisdom of her own place, her own nature. The edge was not a place of deficiency, but a crucible of resilience. The shallows were not a lack of depth, but a space where roots could spread widely, embracing change, becoming a part of the very flow she had resisted. She closed her eyes, feeling the gentle sway of the reeds in her own spirit, a subtle mirroring of their dance in the wind. The mud still held her, but its grip no longer felt like a prison. It felt like an embrace, a grounding, a connection to the very earth that nourished the bending, unbreaking reeds. She was not a victim of the edge. She was a participant in its vibrant, flexible life. She opened her eyes, and the world seemed to shimmer with a new understanding, a quiet beauty she had overlooked in her striving for a different kind of existence. Kyle, watching her from his vantage point, felt the profound resonance of her silent realization. He had seen the panic, the struggle, and then the deep stillness that had settled over her. He had watched her eyes follow the reeds, and he had seen the subtle shift in her expression, the softening of her features, the quiet awe that had replaced frustration. The lesson, unspoken, was clear. His own journey, his own restless searching, had often felt like a struggle against the currents, a desire to find a fixed, unmoving point in a world of constant change. He had yearned for a deep, solid center, a profound anchoring that would make him impervious to the winds of uncertainty. But Yasmin's moment, the quiet wisdom of the reeds, revealed a different kind of strength. Perhaps true grounding was not about rigidity, but about flexibility. Perhaps stability was not about resisting change, but about embracing it, about learning to bend without breaking, to sway with the currents without being swept away. The feeling of being ungrounded, of floating just above the surface, could transform into an understanding of adaptability, a quiet strength found in yielding, in connecting with the ever-changing flow of life. He thought of Radha's unbreakable peppercorns, their inherent resilience, and now of Yasmin's flexible reeds, their strength in yielding, two different manifestations of enduring power, both speaking to a core that could not be shattered, whether by grinding pressure or by sweeping winds. His own discontent, his own feeling of being an outsider, an observer, might not be a flaw, but his own unique position at the edge, where new perspectives could bloom, where the dance between land and water, between certainty and uncertainty, was most vivid. Cale stood up, his own steps now feeling more aligned with the gentle sway of the marsh. The rain had softened to a fine mist, clinging to the reeds like tiny diamonds. He did not approach Yasmin again that evening. He simply left her to her quiet realization, knowing that some truths, once seen, needed no commentary, no external validation. They simply were, settling deep within the heart. As he walked away from the marsh, the rhythmic rustle of the reeds seemed to whisper a new kind of promise, a gentle melody of adaptability and quiet strength. The path ahead was still unknown, but now Cale carried with him not just the memory of resilience and living presence, but the profound understanding of flexibility, of yielding without breaking, of finding strength in the very edges he had once sought to escape. His spirit felt a little more pliant, a little less rigid in its striving, ready to sway with the winds of the world, knowing that even in the deepest mud, one could find a quiet, unbreaking root. The stars, now fully emerged, cast a silver glow upon the water, reflecting the endless, graceful dance of the reeds. The path ahead was still unknown, but now Cale carried with him not just the memory of resilience and living presence, but the profound understanding of flexibility, of yielding without breaking, of finding strength in the very edges he had once sought to escape. His spirit felt a little more pliant, a little less rigid in its striving, ready to sway with the winds of the world, knowing that even in the deepest mud, one could find a quiet, unbreaking root. The stars, now fully emerged, cast a silver glow upon the water, reflecting the endless, graceful dance of the reeds. He walked for many days after leaving the marsh, his steps lighter, his gaze more open to the subtle shifts in the landscape. The scent of damp earth gave way to drier, dustier trails, the gentle rustle of reeds replaced by the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of unseen cattle. He passed through small hamlets where life unfolded with its familiar, unhurried rhythm, where faces were kind and hands were busy. He listened more than he spoke, allowing the world to offer its quiet stories, its gentle teachings. One afternoon, as the sun climbed to its zenith, pressing down with a warm, heavy hand, a new scent began to drift on the air. It was sharp and pungent, at first a curious tang, then growing stronger, more insistent, until it filled the very air Cale breathed. It was the unmistakable aroma of mustard, rich and biting, promising a potent flavor. His path led him to a small, open-sided workshop where the scent was strongest, where the air itself seemed to vibrate with a focused energy. Here, Cale found Dev, the mustard oil presser. Dev was a man in his late 40s, robust and solid, his frame a testament to years of physical labor. His dark hair, receding at the temples, framed a face that often seemed set in a serious, almost stern expression. The pervasive, pungent scent of mustard oil clung to his clothes, his hands, and even seemed to emanate from his very skin. He moved with a heavy, purposeful grace, guiding a large wooden beam that, harnessed to a patient ox, slowly turned a massive stone wheel. The wheel crushed the dark, tiny mustard seeds in a rhythmic, grinding motion, releasing their potent oils into a collecting basin. Dev was intense in his work, focused and unyielding. Kyle watched him from a respectful distance, observing the steady rhythm of his movements, the almost fierce concentration in his eyes. Dev believed in sharpness, in potency, in the powerful, unmistakable flavor of the mustard seed. He spoke little, but when he did, his voice was direct, sometimes a little gruff, like the sharp bite of his oil. He believed that life, too, should possess such intensity, such an undeniable presence. Yet despite handling such powerful flavors daily, Kale sensed in Dev a familiar restlessness, a quiet yearning. Dev, it seemed, felt his own life was bland, somehow lacking the sharpness, the potency, the vibrant intensity he extracted from the seeds. He often sought more, believing that a stronger sensation, a more profound experience was necessary to truly feel alive, to fill a quiet, unarticulated void within him. He added more seeds to the press, seeking a deeper, richer oil, a more potent essence, always striving for that ultimate, sharp flavor. Kale watched Dev for many hours as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky with hues of orange and gold, the rhythmic creak of the press, the steady footfalls of the ox, the constant, powerful scent of the mustard oil, all spoke of an unceasing pursuit of intensity. Kale recognized something of his own past in Dev's striving. He, too, had sought a profound, undeniable truth, a grand revelation that would cut through his quiet discontent, a wisdom that would hit him with the sharpness of Dev's mustard. He had, perhaps, been searching for a truth so potent, so overwhelming, that it would leave no room for questions, no space for the subtle whispers of his own heart. As the day waned and the last of the sun's rays stretched long shadows across the dusty ground, Dev finished his pressing for the day. He wiped his hands on his simple cloth, the pungent scent clinging stubbornly to them. He looked into the nearly empty basin, a slight dissatisfaction in his eyes, as if even this potent oil could never quite be potent enough. He turned to a small, rough-hewn table in the corner of his workshop where a simple meal awaited him. A small bowl of lentils, a handful of cooked greens, and a thick, round piece of plain bread. Dev reached for the bread, his mind perhaps still on the sharpness of the mustard he had just pressed, the intensity he sought. He broke off a piece, its surface dry and unadorned. He dipped it into the bowl of lentils and ate, his movements still economical, focused. Kyle watched quietly from his shaded spot, feeling the subtle shift in the air as the day surrendered to evening. The pungent aroma of the oil had begun to soften, mingling with the earthy smell of the cooling ground. Then Dev reached for another piece of the bread. This time, he did not dip it into the lentils. Perhaps, in his preoccupation, his hand simply missed the bowl. Or perhaps, for some reason, he simply chose to eat it plain. He brought the unadorned bread to his mouth, expecting perhaps a certain blandness, a familiar, unremarkable taste. His senses, after hours steeped in the potent, biting aroma of mustard, were accustomed to a powerful assault, a sharp, undeniable presence. He bit into the plain bread, and then something shifted. A flicker of surprise crossed Dev's face. His brow, usually set in a serious line, softened almost imperceptibly. He paused, the bread halfway to his mouth. He took another bite, slowly this time, his eyes widening in a quiet, unexpected wonder. His gaze drifted away from the bread, unfocused, as if tasting something far beyond the simple flour and water. A profound, gentle sweetness bloomed on his tongue. It was not the sharp, immediate sweetness of fruit, nor the rich, indulgent sweetness of honey. It was a subtle sweetness, a quiet, unassuming flavor that had been there all along, hidden beneath the surface, waiting patiently to be discovered. His senses, accustomed to the overwhelming intensity of the mustard, had been dulled, unable to perceive the delicate, quiet flavors that existed in the simplest of things. But now, in the absence of that sharpness, in the unexpected encounter with plainness, the hidden sweetness of the bread revealed itself, a gentle whisper after a loud shout, a soft smile, hesitant at first, then more certain, slowly spread across Dev's face. It was a smile of quiet surprise, of dawning recognition. He had been so focused on adding more, on seeking greater intensity, that he had lost the ability to taste the very essence of simplicity. The plain bread, in its quiet humility, had offered him a profound teaching. The sharpness he sought was not always the measure of life's worth. Sometimes, the deepest satisfaction, the most profound taste, lay in the unadorned, in the subtle, in the gentle, quiet sweetness that resided within everything, if only one's senses were open enough to perceive it. Cale, watching from his quiet corner, felt a deep resonance within his own heart. He had observed Dev's diligent work, his tireless pursuit of intensity, and had recognized his own past striving. And now, he witnessed this quiet, unexpected moment of realization. It was not a grand revelation, not a sudden flash of blinding light. It was merely the taste of plain bread, a simple, everyday thing, revealing a hidden truth. Cale reflected on how he, too, might be missing the gentle flavors of his own quiet life. In his persistent search for a profound, overarching wisdom, a dramatic answer to his restlessness, he might have overlooked the subtle, understated truths that presented themselves in the ordinary moments, in the simple, unadorned fabric of existence. Had he, like Dev, become so accustomed to seeking a certain kind of intensity, a particular sharpness of insight, that his inner senses had grown dull to the quiet, gentle sweetness of simply being? He thought of Radha's unbreakable core, found amidst the grinding. He remembered Gopal's living presence, heard in the breathing of his cattle. He recalled Yasmin's flexible strength, embraced in the swaying of the reeds. And now, Dev's rediscovered subtlety, tasted in the plain bread. Each lesson, so different, yet each pointing to a truth that was not loud or demanding, but quiet, inherent, and often overlooked in the pursuit of something more. The air in the workshop, once thick with the pungent aroma of mustard, now seemed to hold a different quality. The sharpness had softened, allowing other, more subtle scents to emerge. The earthy smell of the ox, the faint aroma of wood, the quiet sweetness that seemed to emanate from Dev's newfound understanding. The stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, their light a gentle counterpoint to the day's intensity. Cale slowly rose to his feet. He did not speak to Dev. The moment, a deeply personal one, needed no commentary. It simply was a quiet bloom of understanding. He turned and walked away from the workshop, leaving Dev to his simple bread and his newfound appreciation for subtlety. As he continued his journey under the vast, silent sky, Cale carried with him the quiet understanding that the search for meaning did not always require a forceful extraction, a sharp, potent truth. Sometimes, the most profound wisdom, the deepest satisfaction, lay hidden in the simplest of things, in the unadorned moments of life, waiting for senses that were open enough to taste their quiet, inherent sweetness. His own spirit felt a little less hungry for grand pronouncements, a little more receptive to the gentle whispers of the world, ready to savor the subtle flavors that had always been there, patiently awaiting discovery. The path ahead beckoned, still unknown, but now, It felt less like a search for a missing piece and more like a gentle, unfolding journey of quiet appreciation. Kyle walked on, the stars above him like a scattering of diamonds on an indigo cloth. The air grew cooler, carrying the faint, sweet scent of night-blooming jasmine from distant hedges. His steps were unhurried, measured, no longer driven by the same urgent, unspoken question that had set him forth from his village. The lessons of the day, particularly Dev's quiet discovery of the bread's hidden sweetness, had left a deep impression, softening the edges of his own persistent seeking. He felt a gentle invitation to pause, to simply be, to allow the truths he had encountered to settle within the quiet spaces of his heart. He found a secluded grove a little way off the main path, where a narrow stream sang its perpetual, murmurous song over smooth, dark stones. Tall, ancient trees, their leaves a deep, velvety green even in the dim light, formed a natural canopy, their branches intertwined as if in a silent, enduring embrace. The ground beneath his feet was soft with moss and fallen leaves, yielding gently to his weight. Here, the world seemed to hold its breath, hushed and still, save for the ceaseless whisper of the water. Cale lowered his small bag to the mossy earth. He did not seek shelter, nor food, nor even the comfort of sleep just yet. He sought only a quiet place, a sanctuary for the spirit, where the echoes of his journey thus far could unfold and be heard without the clamor of further seeking. He sat down beneath the broadest of the trees, his back resting against its sturdy, silent trunk. The cool, firm bark offered a steady support, a grounding presence. He closed his eyes, allowing the sounds of the grove to wash over him, the gentle, ceaseless flow of the stream, a rhythmic lullaby, the soft rustle of leaves as a faint breeze stirred the branches high above, the distant hoot of an owl, a quiet query in the night. He felt the cool air on his skin, the subtle shift in temperature as the hours deepened. And within him, the lessons he had encountered began to stir, not as memories to be recalled, but as sensations, as understandings that had taken root. He thought of Radha, her strong, calloused hands, the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of her pestle. He remembered her words, her feeling of being ground down, pulverized by the constant pressures of her life, and then the quiet miracle of the ancient peppercorns, refusing to break, their inner strength unyielding despite the relentless force applied to them. Kyle had felt that same crushing weight in his own spirit, that sense of being diminished by the demands of the world, by the unspoken expectation that he should be more, should do more. He had sought an escape from this feeling, a way to break free. But Radha's peppercorns had shown him a different truth, that strength was not always about resistance, not about fighting the grinding, but about recognizing an inherent, unbreakable core that simply was. It lay within, not as something to be found or acquired, but as something to be acknowledged. He felt a quiet sense of that deep, inner resilience settling within him now, a knowing that no matter the pressures, there was a part of him that remained whole, untouched, firm. It was a gentle release from the illusion of fragility, a quiet blossoming of inner fortitude. The image of Gopal then came to mind, the diligent young cowherder, counting his herd with such meticulous care. Cale remembered Gopal's persistent void, the missing that numbers could never fill, the anxiety of a perceived absence, and then the profound stillness of the night pasture, Gopal listening, truly listening, to the distinct rhythmic breathing of each living cow, knowing their presence not by sight or by count, but by the very essence of their being. Cale had, in his own way, been counting. He had been counting the things he lacked, the answers he hadn't found, the peace that seemed elusive. He had been quantifying his discontent, trying to measure the missing in his own life. But Gopal's quiet revelation had taught him that true presence was not a number, not a sum of parts, but a felt reality, a deep, resonant knowing of life itself. He had sought a wisdom, the answer, a singular, definitive truth. But perhaps the wisdom was not a thing to be counted or categorized, but a living, breathing presence to be deeply felt. He allowed himself to simply feel his own presence now, the gentle rise and fall of his chest, the quiet hum of his own life, uncounted, unmeasured, simply being. His thoughts drifted to Yasmin, the reed cutter. He saw her in his mind's eye, stuck in the deep, clinging mud, her frustration palpable. He remembered her longing to be in the center of life, feeling herself forever on the periphery. And then, the grace of the reeds, bending and swaying with the wind, yielding deeply, almost touching the water, yet never breaking. They thrived at the very edge, in the place of constant change, because it was there that their quiet flexibility was most potent. Cale had felt ungrounded, adrift, seeking a solid footing, a firm center for his own life. He had perceived himself as being stuck in a similar way, trapped by his own uncertainty. But Yasmin's quiet insight had revealed the strength in adaptability, the power of yielding, the wisdom of embracing the edges where change was most active. It was not about finding an immovable center, but about becoming like the reeds, rooted yet flexible, strong in their ability to bend without breaking. He felt his own spirit begin to sway, not with instability, but with a newfound, gentle suppleness, a willingness to flow with the currents of life rather than resist them. And finally, Dev, the mustard oil presser, came to mind. Cale recalled the sharp, pungent aroma of the workshop, Dev's tireless pursuit of intensity, his belief that sharpness was the measure of life's worth. And then, the unexpected sweetness of the plain bread, a flavor so subtle, so unassuming, yet so profoundly satisfying once his senses were open enough to perceive it. Cale had been searching for a profound wisdom, a dramatic answer, a truth that would strike him with its undeniable intensity. He had, perhaps, been overlooking the quiet, gentle truths that lay hidden in the ordinary, in the unadorned moments of his own existence. Dev's simple meal had shown him that sometimes the most exquisite flavors, the deepest satisfactions, were not loud or demanding, but quiet, inherent, waiting patiently for a receptive heart. He felt a gentle softening within himself, a quiet invitation to slow down, to taste the subtle nuances of his own being, to appreciate the simple, unadorned fabric of his present moment. The lessons settled within Cale, not as separate ideas, but as interwoven threads of understanding. They were like the pebbles in the stream, each distinct, yet smoothed and softened by the ceaseless flow, contributing to the quiet harmony of the whole. Resilience, presence, flexibility, subtlety. These were not grand pronouncements from a distant master, but gentle whispers from the everyday, offered by ordinary people, revealing extraordinary truths. He opened his eyes, gazing at the stream as it flowed past him. Its water was constantly moving, always changing, yet the stream itself remained, an enduring presence. It was a perfect metaphor for his own journey, his own life. There was continuous movement, continuous experience, yet beneath it all, an underlying stillness, a core that remained. Cale allowed his awareness to drift to his own breath. He noticed its gentle rhythm, the soft inhalation, the slow, quiet exhalation. He felt the air cool as it entered his nostrils, then warm as it left. He observed the subtle rise and fall of his chest, the quiet expansion and contraction of his abdomen. There was no need to control it, no need to change it, no need to seek a particular rhythm. It simply was a constant, unwavering presence, an anchor in the flow of life. In that quiet grove, by the murmuring stream, Kyle sat, simply being. He felt the ancient tree supporting his back, the soft moss beneath him, the cool air on his skin. He listened to the quiet symphony of the night, observed the gentle flow of the water, and felt the steady, quiet rhythm of his own breath. The restless tugging, the pervasive sense of something missing, had softened, quieted, almost dissolved. It was not a sudden, dramatic disappearance, but a gentle fading, like mist burning off in the morning sun. He was no longer reaching outward, straining to grasp a truth that lay beyond him. Instead, he felt a quiet settling, a deep inner recognition of the wisdom that had been patiently awaiting discovery within the very fabric of his own experience. The path ahead still beckoned, still unknown, but Cale's step would be different now. It would be lighter, more grounded, infused with a quiet appreciation for the subtle, inherent sweetness of simply being present. The journey continued, but the restless seeking had begun its gentle, quiet transformation into a peaceful, unfolding awareness. He rose, a soft smile on his lips, feeling the soft earth beneath his feet, now a little more connected, a little more at ease. He breathed in the cool night air, a quiet understanding blooming in his heart, ready for whatever the path might gently reveal. Kyle left the quiet grove, the soft earth yielding gently beneath his feet. The stillness of the stream, the enduring presence of the ancient tree, and the quiet rhythm of his own breath had settled a deep peace within him. The restless tugging, the subtle ache of something missing, had truly softened, leaving behind not a void, but a quiet, receptive space. He walked with a new lightness, a quiet appreciation for the gentle, unadorned fabric of his present moment, ready for whatever the path might reveal. The winding path eventually led him away from the solitary quiet of the wilderness, toward the soft, rising hum of human activity. The air, which had carried the scent of damp earth and green leaves, slowly began to mingle with new aromas. The faint, warm smell of cooking spices, the sweet perfume of drying flowers, and the pervasive, earthy tang of dust stirred by many feet. Distant voices, at first indistinct, resolved into a gentle murmur, then a steady chorus of greetings and calls. He was approaching a village market. As Cale drew closer, the scene unfolded before him, a tapestry woven with sound and color. Brightly colored cloths draped over stalls, piled high with an abundance of fruits, vegetables, and woven goods. People moved with a quiet purpose, their footsteps soft on the dusty ground, their conversations a melodic undercurrent to the rustle of baskets and the gentle clinking of coins. Children darted between legs, their laughter like tiny bells, adding a cheerful counterpoint to the steady rhythm of commerce. Amidst this gentle bustle, Cale noticed a woman seated on a low mat beneath a canvas awning, her stall a small island of order. This was Kamla, the beetle leaf seller. She was a woman in her early 40s, her sari a cheerful splash of deep red, a vibrant hue that seemed to defy the dusty ground around her. Her hands were nimble, moving with an almost hypnotic grace as she picked up a broad, dark green beetle leaf, expertly smeared a paste onto its surface, and then folded it into a neat, compact triangle. Each movement was precise, practiced, a testament to years spent in this quiet, repetitive craft. Cale found a spot nearby, a low wooden bench beneath a shady tree, and watched. He observed her customers, men and women of all ages, approaching her stall with a familiar ease. They would exchange a few soft words, a gentle nod, and then Kamla would offer them a carefully prepared betel quid. Her customers would take it, place it in their mouths, and Kale could see the subtle shift in their expressions, a softening around the eyes, a quiet pleasure blooming on their faces. The betel was a small luxury, a moment of gentle stimulation, a quiet ritual of enjoyment. Kamla's hands continued their rhythmic dance, preparing one leaf after another. Yet, as Kale watched, he noticed something in her eyes. Despite the cheerful red of her sari, despite the pleasure she so readily provided to others, her gaze often seemed distant, a little veiled. There was a quiet sadness there, a subtle disconnect. Her lips, though often curved in a polite, gentle smile for her customers, seemed to hold a hint of something unspoken, something unexperienced. Later, as the market's energy softened with the afternoon sun, Kale approached her stall. Her voice, when she spoke to him, was gentle, a little melancholic, exactly as her eyes had suggested. "The leaves are fresh today," she offered, her nimble fingers still at work. Kale nodded. "They bring a quiet pleasure to many," he observed softly. Kamla paused, her gaze drifting over the bustling market, then returning to her hands. "Indeed," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "They do. I see it in their faces, the subtle lift of their spirits. It is a good thing to provide." She sighed, a soft, almost imperceptible sound. "But my own mouth, Kale, often feels dry of that joy. I prepare the pleasure for others, but I taste little of it myself. It is as if I am merely the vessel, the hands that create, but not the heart that truly receives." Kale sat quietly, his own heart hearing her words. He understood her feeling, this sense of being detached from the very experience she facilitated for others. He had felt something similar in his own life, a striving to achieve a certain state, a certain peace, only to find himself observing it from a distance, rather than living it fully. He had sought a wisdom that would fill his emptiness, bring him peace, and perhaps, like Kamla, he had been so focused on his own consumption of joy that he missed the quiet dignity in the act of providing, in the selfless contribution itself. The afternoon sun continued its slow descent, painting the market in hues of gold and amber. The flow of customers had thinned, and Kamla continued her quiet work, occasionally glancing at Kale, as if finding a silent companion in his presence. The rhythm of her hands, the rustle of the leaves, the distant hum of the market, these were the only sounds between them. Then, an old woman, her back slightly bent with age, her face a roadmap of gentle wrinkles, approached the stall. She moved slowly, deliberately, her eyes, though clouded by time, holding a soft, knowing warmth. She did not ask for a prepared betel quid. Instead, she spoke in a soft, reedy voice that seemed to carry the wisdom of many seasons. "Kamla," she said, her voice a gentle whisper. "My teeth are long gone, and the chewing of betel is a distant memory. But I have some fresh rice, cooked just so, and it needs a careful wrapping for my journey home. Your strong, broad leaves, Kamla, they hold things so well. May I have a few, simply as they are?" Kamla paused, her nimble fingers hovering over a fresh stack of leaves. Her distant gaze suddenly sharpened, her eyes widening almost imperceptibly. She looked at the old woman, then at the simple request, a request so different from the usual. The old woman did not seek pleasure, did not seek stimulation. She sought containment, a gentle wrapping, a way to carry sustenance. She sought not the betel's flavor, but its form, its strength, its ability to hold and protect. A quiet understanding began to bloom on Kamla's face, a subtle shift in the landscape of her features. She reached for the largest, freshest leaves, selecting them with even greater care than she used for her chewing customers. Her movements, usually so practiced and almost automatic, now held a new tenderness, a quiet reverence. She gently placed the leaves into the old woman's outstretched, trembling hands. The old woman smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached her ancient eyes. "Thank you, Kamla," she murmured, her voice filled with quiet gratitude. "These will serve me well." She turned and slowly, deliberately, began to make her way out of the market, the green leaves a small, precious bundle in her grasp. Kamla watched her go, a new expression on her face, one of quiet wonder. She looked down at her remaining leaves, no longer seeing them merely as vessels for flavor, but as something more fundamental, more versatile. They could bring pleasure, yes, but they could also hold sustenance. They could provide comfort in a different way, a practical, nourishing way. Her leaves, and by extension her work, served a wider spectrum of needs than she had ever allowed herself to perceive. Her contribution was not limited to the fleeting joy of the chew, but extended to the quiet dignity of preservation, of carrying life's most basic necessities. She was not just a provider of pleasure, she was a facilitator of life, in its many varied forms. Her mouth, Cale noticed, no longer seemed so dry. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips, a smile that seemed to come from a deeper, more settled place within her. The detachment had softened, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose, a gentle connection to the broader fabric of life's needs. Kyle, observing this quiet transformation, felt a similar shift within himself. He had been so focused on finding his peace, his wisdom, his understanding. He had been seeking a truth that would fill his perceived lack, bring him joy. But in watching Kamla, he saw that true fulfillment, true purpose, often lay in the act of selfless contribution, in serving needs that one might not directly experience or even understand. The dignity was not in the receipt of joy, but in the offering of it, in the quiet, unassuming act of providing, whether for pleasure or for sustenance, whether for a moment of flavor or for the carrying of life's daily bread. He realized then that his own journey, his own seeking, was not solely for himself. Perhaps the wisdom he was gathering, the peace he was slowly cultivating, was also for something larger, something beyond his own individual experience. Perhaps, like Kamla's leaves, his own journey was meant to serve in ways he could not yet fully comprehend, in ways that might not directly bring him the joy he sought, but would contribute to the quiet, interconnected flow of life itself. The sun had now dipped lower, casting long, peaceful shadows across the market. The sound softened, the colors deepened. Cale felt a quiet warmth spread through his chest, a new layer of understanding settling gently into his heart. He carried with him the image of Kamla's nimble hands, the vibrant red of her sari, and the soft, knowing smile of the old woman, holding her precious bundle of leaves and rice. He understood with a quiet certainty the profound and gentle dignity of selfless contribution, a dignity that asked nothing in return but simply was. His path continued, now illuminated by this soft, quiet truth. Kyle left the quiet market, the image of Kamla's quiet smile and the old woman's precious bundle held gently in his mind. The subtle shift he had witnessed, the quiet dignity of selfless contribution, had settled a new layer of understanding within him. He walked with a lighter step, the path unfolding before him, a series of gentle discoveries. His journey led him now to a place of industry, a construction site on the edge of a growing village. Here, Foundations were being laid for new homes, for new beginnings. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut wood and damp earth, punctuated by a rhythmic, powerful sound, a deep, resonant thud, thud, thud that echoed through the valley. It was the sound of Ravi, the pile driver. Ravi was a man of impressive build, in his late 30s, with muscles sculpted by years of strenuous, deliberate labor. His broad face, often streaked with dirt and sweat, held an open, honest expression, and his dark hair was usually damp against his brow. He moved with a grounded strength, each step purposeful, each strike of his heavy hammer a testament to his power. He was driving long, sturdy wooden piles deep into the earth, creating anchors, providing stability for the structures that would rise above. He was building foundations, not for himself, but for others. Cale watched him for a long time, observing the powerful rhythmic motion. The hammer rose, paused for a breath, then descended with a mighty thud, sending tremors through the ground. Dust rose with each impact, a fine cloud around Ravi's strong, unyielding form. He was a pillar of strength, a creator of steadfastness. Yet, as Kyle observed, he sensed a familiar disquiet in Ravi, a subtle current beneath the powerful exterior. One afternoon, during a lull in the work, Cale approached Ravi, his voice soft, almost swallowed by the lingering echoes of the hammer. "Ravi," Cale began, "your work is so vital. You drive these great wooden pillars deep, creating such strong foundations for others. You provide a place for them to build, to settle, to be secure." Ravi paused, wiping his brow with the back of a calloused hand. His deep voice, usually so resonant with the sound of his work, now held a note of weariness, a quiet sigh. "Yes, Kyle," he replied, looking at the half-driven pile before him. "That is what I do. I drive the roots for others so they may stand firm. I provide the anchors." He looked out at the burgeoning village, then back at his own powerful hands. "But sometimes, Cale, I feel as if I am the one floating. I drive these roots deep into the earth for everyone else, yet I search for my own. I feel ungrounded, as if I have no true place to settle, no deep connection to hold me fast. I long for my own roots, my own stability, yet I am always moving, always striking, always providing it for others." Cale sat quietly, hearing Ravi's words, feeling the truth of them deep inside his own restless heart. He understood this paradox, this sense of providing something essential for others while feeling its absence in one's own life. He had sought a wisdom that would anchor his spirit, bring him peace, make him feel truly grounded. He had been looking for a stability that felt solid, unmoving, perhaps even unyielding, like the piles Ravi drove. But he too had felt that floating sensation, that subtle lack of a true inner root. Ravi continued his work, the thud-thud-thud returning, a powerful, insistent rhythm. Cale spent several days near the construction site, observing Ravi, sensing his quiet longing. He watched as the new foundations took shape, each pile driven deep, each one a testament to Ravi's strength and dedication. The sun rose and set, painting the site in golden light, then in the deep purples of dusk, and still, Ravi worked, driving roots into the earth. One afternoon, a section of an old abandoned structure nearby needed to be cleared. It was a remnant of an earlier time, its purpose long forgotten, its wooden piles now soft with age and decay. Ravi, with his powerful strength, was tasked with pulling out these ancient, rotting timbers to make way for the new. He grunted with effort, straining against the earth's reluctant grip, his muscles flexing under his sweat-soaked tunic. Slowly, with a deep, tearing sound of earth and wood parting, one of the ancient piles began to emerge. It was dark with dampness, its surface softened by time, its edges blurred by decay. It had been buried for generations, forgotten, left to the slow work of the earth. It seemed a symbol of an ending, a return to dust. But as the pile was finally freed from the earth's embrace and laid on its side, a gasp, a quiet sound of wonder escaped Ravi's lips, and Kale, who had been watching, felt his own breath catch. From the very base of the decaying wooden pile, from the part that had been deepest in the earth, a network of roots had quietly, persistently emerged, not the strong, straight roots of the original tree, but new, tender roots, thin and white, reaching out into the soil, clinging to the earth that had held it. And from the top of the pile, where it had met the air, a tiny, vibrant green shoot, no bigger than Kale's thumb, had pushed its way through the softened wood, reaching for the sun. The decaying pile, once a driven stake, had not merely rotted away. It had chosen to grow. It had chosen to become a tree again, not through force, not by being driven, but by quietly, organically, putting down its own new roots where it had been placed. It had found its own stability, not by resisting the earth, but by embracing it, by drawing life from the very place it had been buried. It had transformed decay into growth, a passive, driven object into a living, rooted being. Ravi knelt beside the pile, his broad, powerful hands incredibly gentle as he touched the tiny green shoot, then traced the delicate white roots. His eyes, usually so focused on the forceful act of driving, now held a soft, profound wonder. He looked at the decaying wood, then at the new life emerging from it, a quiet smile slowly spreading across his dirt-streaked face. "It chose to grow," Ravi murmured, his deep voice barely a whisper, a sound of awe. "It was driven, then forgotten, left to decay. But it chose to become rooted. It chose to become itself again, in its own way, right where it was." He looked at Kyle, his eyes shining with a new understanding. "True stability, Kyle," he said, "is not always about how deep you are driven or how much force you exert. Sometimes, it is simply about choosing to grow where you are placed. It is about allowing the earth to hold you and finding your own way to root, even when all seems lost, even when you seem to be merely decaying." Kyle, observing this quiet transformation, felt a profound shift within himself. He had been seeking an anchor, a grounding, a peace that felt solid and unyielding, something that could be forcefully established. He had been looking for a wisdom that would drive away his restlessness, like a pile driven into the earth. But in watching Ravi, and in witnessing the quiet miracle of the rooted pile, he understood that true stability was not about force, but about growth. It was not about external pressure, but about internal, organic unfolding. His own longing for roots, for a deep connection, suddenly felt less like a lack to be filled by external means, and more like an invitation to simply be, to allow himself to grow where he was, to put down his own quiet inner roots, not through striving, but through gentle acceptance and presence. He realized that the wisdom he sought was not to be found in resisting the currents of life, but in allowing himself to be held by them, and from that place of quiet acceptance, to choose to grow. The sun began its slow descent, casting long, peaceful shadows across the construction site. The air cooled, and a gentle breeze whispered through the newly exposed roots of the ancient pile. Kyle felt a quiet warmth spread through his chest, a new layer of understanding settling gently into his heart. He carried with him the image of Ravi's powerful hands, now so tender and the sight of the tiny, vibrant green shoot pushing its way from the decaying wood, a testament to life's quiet, persistent will to root and grow. He understood with a quiet certainty the profound and gentle dignity of choosing to grow where one is placed, of finding one's own inner anchors, not through force, but through life itself. His path continued, now illuminated by this soft, quiet truth. His path continued, now illuminated by this soft, quiet truth. Cale walked with a lighter step, the image of the rooted pile a quiet companion in his thoughts. He carried with him the understanding that stability was not always about forceful anchors, but about the gentle, persistent will to grow from within, to root oneself in the very ground of one's being, even when that ground felt uncertain or impermanent. He felt a subtle shift in his own restless heart, a sense that perhaps the peace he sought was not to be found in resisting the flow of life, but in allowing himself to be held by it, and from that place, to simply choose to grow. The winding path eventually led him away from the construction site, away from the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of the pile driver, and towards the soft, murmuring bustle of a village market. The air here was vibrant with the scent of roasted nuts and sweet fruits, mingled with the earthy aroma of fresh vegetables and the distant sound of vendors calling out their wares. People moved with an easy, unhurried grace, their voices a gentle hum beneath the wide, benevolent sky. In a quieter corner of the market, beneath the shade of a large, ancient tamarind tree, Cale noticed a small, unassuming stall. A man sat there, his movements quick and precise, his hands deft and sure. This was Kadu, the tooth puller. He was a man of uncertain age, perhaps 50, his face etched with lines that spoke of both concentration and a quiet weariness. His fingers, long and nimble, moved with a practiced efficiency that was almost hypnotic, a blend of gentle reassurance and swift, decisive action. He wore simple, practical clothes, unadorned, reflecting the directness of his craft. Kyle watched as a young woman, her face contorted with pain, approached Kidu. He spoke to her in a calm, low voice, his words a soothing balm even as his fingers probed gently, then with a sudden, swift motion, extracted the offending tooth. A gasp, then a sigh of immediate, profound relief escaped the woman's lips. She pressed a cloth to her mouth, her eyes now wide with gratitude, the pain, for the moment, gone. Ketu offered a quiet word of advice, a gentle hand on her shoulder, before she moved away, her steps lighter than before. Cale observed Ketu for many hours, seeing how he brought swift, precise endings to suffering. Each extraction was a small act of mercy, a sudden cessation of an acute ache. Ketu's patients, whether young or old, came to him with faces clouded by pain and left with the quiet dawning of relief. Yet, Kyle noticed something in Ketu's own eyes, a persistent, unlocatable ache that seemed to reside there, a shadow that his skillful hands could not reach, a pain he could not pull from himself. Later, when the stream of patience had slowed, Kyle approached Ketu. "You bring such swift relief to others," Kyle said, his voice soft, "ending their suffering with such precision. Yet I sense a quiet burden within you, an ache that your own hands cannot reach." Ketu paused, his instruments laid out neatly on a clean cloth. He looked at his hands, then out at the market, his gaze distant, as if searching for something unseen. "It is true, young traveler," he replied, his voice calm, yet holding a subtle note of frustration Cale had sensed. "I can remove the source of agony for so many. A tooth, rotten and throbbing, is a presence, a weight that can be pulled, leaving only a clear space where it once was. but there is an ache within me, a persistent, hollow thrum that has no root, no visible form, no presence that can be grasped and removed. It simply is. It is a pain that cannot be pulled out, for I know not what it is, nor where it truly resides. It is like a tooth that never grew, but somehow still aches with its absence. Kyle sat quietly, hearing Ketu's words, feeling the truth of them deep inside his own restless heart. He understood this feeling, this unlocatable ache, this sense of a missing part, a void that could not be filled by external means. It echoed his own initial restlessness, his own yearning for a peace that seemed just beyond his grasp, a quiet suffering that had no name, no form, no clear source to be extracted or resolved. He had sought to find something, to add something, to fill something that felt absent within himself. He had been looking for a wisdom that would remove his quiet discontent, like a skilled hand removing a painful tooth. The sun began its slow descent, painting the market in hues of orange and gold. The air cooled and the sounds of the market softened, growing distant. Just as Ketu was beginning to pack his instruments, a man approached his stall, walking with a steady, unhurried gait. His face was weathered, his clothes simple, and he carried a quiet dignity. "Ketu," the man said, his voice gentle and clear, "I have come to thank you once more. It has been many moons since you pulled the aching tooth from my jaw. For so long, it had throbbed, a relentless drum of pain in my head. You removed it, and the sickness was gone." Ketu nodded, a small, knowing smile touching his lips. "I remember, good sir. It was a stubborn one." The man smiled faintly. "Indeed. And yet," he continued, his gaze thoughtful, "even now, there is still a feeling. Not the old pain, the throbbing, sickening ache. That is truly gone. But there is a different kind of pain in that empty space. It is a pain like missing. The tongue still seeks that lost companion. The jaw still feels the gap where it once resided. It is a quiet ache, a subtle awareness of absence, not a presence that causes suffering, but an emptiness that simply is. It is not a bad pain, you understand. Simply a missing. A quiet reminder that something was once there and now is not. It is a different kind of pain, one that does not need to be pulled, but simply acknowledged." Ketu's hands, which had been deftly wiping his instruments, stilled. He looked at the man, then his gaze drifted to the empty space in the man's mouth where the tooth had been. He listened to the words, "A pain like missing, an emptiness that simply is, not a presence that causes suffering, but an emptiness that simply is." A quiet understanding bloomed in Ketu's weary eyes. He looked at Kale, then back at the man, a profound realization softening his features, his own persistent, unlocatable ache. It was not a presence to be removed, not a hidden sickness that needed a swift, precise yank. It was not a tooth that had grown in the wrong place. It was the pain of a missing, an absence, a quiet void that simply was. It needed no extraction, no forceful removal. It needed only gentle acknowledgement, a quiet acceptance of its nature. It was not something to be pulled out, but something to be understood as an empty space. "A missing," Ketu murmured, his voice barely a whisper, a sound of gentle awe. "Yes, that is it. That is the ache I have carried. Not a presence to be removed, but an absence to be understood. How could I have looked for something to pull when there was nothing there to grasp?" A quiet, peaceful smile, free from the usual weariness, slowly spread across his face. He nodded slowly, a deep, inner shift settling within him. Kyle, observing this quiet transformation, felt a profound shift within himself as well. He had seen Ketu's skillful removal of pain and had related to the tooth puller's personal, unlocatable ache. He had sought for himself a wisdom that would extract his own restlessness, that would pull out the feeling of something missing, leaving him whole and complete. He had imagined a clarity that would forcefully remove all confusion, all suffering. But in witnessing the quiet conversation between Ketu and the grateful patient, Kale began to understand that not all suffering was a solid presence to be extracted. Some aches were absences, not things to be pulled out, but voids to be acknowledged. His own initial restlessness, his feeling of a missing, was perhaps not a flaw to be corrected, but a gentle emptiness to be accepted. It was not a sickness to be cured by a forceful removal, but a space to be understood, to be known for what it was. He realized that true peace was not necessarily the absence of all feeling, not a forceful removal of every ache, but a gentle acceptance of the nature of those feelings, whether they were presences or absences. Some sufferings, like the missing tooth, were not meant to be removed, but simply to be understood as part of the landscape of being, a quiet reminder of what once was, or what was never there. This understanding brought a quiet, tender relief to Kale, softening his own internal striving. He began to see that his journey was not about finding a tool to extract all discomfort, but about cultivating a deeper, more compassionate understanding of its many forms. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting the market in the deep blues and purples of dusk. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the ancient tamarind tree, carrying with it the quiet echoes of the day. Kale felt a new layer of understanding settle gently into his heart, a quiet acceptance of the nuanced nature of suffering and peace. He carried with him the image of Ketu's weary eyes, now softened by a quiet realization, and the profound truth that sometimes the most stubborn ache is not a presence to be removed, but an absence to be gently acknowledged, and in that acknowledgement, to find a quiet understanding. His path continued, now illuminated by this soft, subtle truth of absence. The path Kale walked now was less traveled, winding away from the bustling thoroughfares and into a gentler landscape. He carried the quiet understanding of absence, the subtle truth that some aches were not to be removed, but simply acknowledged. This new understanding softened his steps, making the journey less about finding a solution and more about simply moving through what was. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth and growing things, a rich, fertile aroma that spoke of life hidden beneath the surface. His journey led him, after several days of walking, to a quiet farm nestled in a wide, verdant valley. Here, the sounds were different again, not the rhythmic thud of a pestle, nor the lowing of cattle, nor the rustle of reeds, nor the sharp scent of mustard, nor the hum of a market, nor the powerful strike of a pile driver, nor the swift clink of a tooth puller's instruments. Here, the air was filled with a deeper, earthier fragrance, a complex aroma of damp soil, decaying leaves, and something subtly sweet, like rich, dark loam. In the heart of this farm, Kale found a man, his back bent over a steaming mound, his movements slow and deliberate. This was Sage, the compost turner, a man in his late 50s. His beard, flecked with gray, seemed to carry the wisdom of many seasons, and his eyes, when he lifted them, held a deep, knowing calm, accustomed to observing the intricate cycles of transformation. His hands, strong and gnarled, were stained with the richness of the earth, as if the soil itself had become a part of him. He wore sturdy, practical clothes, simple garments that offered no adornment, and they too smelled faintly of damp soil and organic matter, a testament to his constant communion with the earth. Sage turned the compost heap with a long-handled fork, stirring the layers of leaves, straw, food scraps, and garden waste. The mound released a plume of warm, earthy steam into the cool morning air, a visible breath of transformation. Cale watched him for a long time, sensing the quiet reverence in Sage's movements, the deep understanding he brought to his work. Sage knew, with an intuitive certainty, precisely when decay ripened into richness, when the broken-down elements became the fertile ground for new life. He understood the intricate dance of life and death, of decomposition and regeneration, better than anyone Cale had ever met. Yet, despite this profound understanding of the Earth's cycles, Cale sensed a familiar, quiet weariness in Sage, a subtle, melancholic rhythm that echoed in the slow, considered cadence of his voice. One afternoon, as the sun warmed their backs and the gentle hum of unseen insects filled the air, Sage paused his turning, leaning on his fork. He looked at the steaming mound, then out at the fields, fallow and waiting. "This compost," Sage began, his voice slow and deep, like the turning of the seasons. "It is a wonder. What was once waste, what seemed to be an ending, becomes the very beginning of new life. It nourishes the earth, so the earth may nourish us. I understand its purpose, its transformation. I know the exact moment when the decay is complete and the richness is ready." He sighed, a soft, almost imperceptible sound that carried a hidden weight. "But my own life, Cale," he continued, his gaze distant. "Sometimes it feels like it is merely decaying. Like this pile, yes, but without the promise of richness. Just decomposition. An ending, without the explosive new growth I see in these fields, without the vibrant sprout that will rise from this dark earth. I turn this compost, and I see the cycle, but I feel only the turning of my own years, the slow decay, without a renewed purpose." Kyle listened, his own heart resonating with Sage's words. He understood this feeling, this sense of a personal winter, a period of quiet unraveling where purpose seemed to fade, and life felt like a slow diminishment rather than a vibrant journey. He too had felt the quiet fear of stagnation, of his own spirit simply wearing down, without a clear path forward, without a vibrant, undeniable purpose to emerge from the quiet dissolution of his old self. He had sought to find his purpose, to add something new and clear to his life, to build something definitive. But Sage spoke of something different, the fear that even the process of breaking down, which should lead to new beginnings, might itself be an end. For several days, Cale remained at the farm, observing Sage. He watched the careful, almost meditative way Sage tended the compost. Each turning was an act of profound care, a gentle redistribution of the elements, allowing air to enter, encouraging the unseen work of countless microorganisms. The compost heap was a microcosm of life itself, hot in its active stages, teeming with invisible life, slowly breaking down the old to create the new. Cale could feel the warmth radiating from the pile, a silent testament to the intense, hidden activity within. He smelled the rich, sweet earthiness, a scent that spoke of deep, slow transformation. Sage would plunge his fork into the dense material, lifting and turning, layer upon layer. Kyle watched as dry leaves mingled with damp kitchen scraps, as woody stalks softened and darkened. It was a process of surrender, of letting go of old forms, allowing them to be broken down, to become something else entirely. Sage knew the signs, the deep brown color, the crumbly texture, the sweet, earthy smell. He knew when it was ready to return to the soil, to become the foundation for a new harvest. But still, the quiet ache lingered in his own spirit. One morning, the air was crisp, and a thin mist hung over the fields. Sage, with his usual slow, deliberate movements, began to turn a section of the compost that had been resting for many weeks. This was the final stage, the rich, dark, finished product. He worked in silence, his breath misting in the cool air, his gaze fixed on the earth. Cale sat on a low wooden bench nearby, watching the quiet ritual, feeling the deep peace of the farm settle into his own heart. Sage's fork sank into the dark, crumbly earth of the compost. He lifted a large clump, turning it gently, and then he paused, his hand stilled, holding the fork aloft. His eyes, usually so calm, widened almost imperceptibly. He knelt slowly, carefully. Kyle leaned forward, a subtle shift in the air, a sense of something profound unfolding. Sage's large, earthy fingers gently parted the dark, rich compost. There, nestled in the very center of the pile, where the heat of decomposition had been most intense, where the breaking down was most complete, was a tiny, vibrant sprout. It was impossibly green, a tender shoot, no bigger than Cale's little finger, pushing its way upwards with an undeniable, quiet determination. It had found its way through the rich, dark soil, nourished by the very process of decay that had consumed its parent seed. It was not a planted seed, but a seed that had found itself somehow in the heart of the transformation and had chosen to burst forth. Sage looked at the sprout, then at his own stained hands, then back at the sprout. His eyes, usually so knowing, now held a look of pure, unadulterated awe, a quiet wonder that transcended all his intellectual understanding. His breath caught, a soft intake of air. "A seed," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper, filled with a profound and sudden realization. A seed, here, in the heart of the decomposition. He traced the tiny stem with a gentle finger, as if afraid to disturb its quiet miracle. It did not wait for the compost to be spread in the field. It did not wait for the season of planting. It grew here, in the very heat of the breaking down. It found its life force, not after the decay, but from it. The decomposition. It was not an end. It was the very cradle of its beginning. It was the concentration of life force, hidden, preparing for this explosive new growth. A quiet understanding bloomed in Sage's gentle eyes, banishing the last vestiges of his weariness. He looked at Kyle, a profound, peaceful smile slowly spreading across his face, a smile that radiated a deep inner shift. "My life," he said, his voice now imbued with a quiet, profound certainty. "My own decomposition. It is not a waste. It is not an ending. It is a slow, rich preparation. It is the gathering of all that has been, transforming it, concentrating it, so that something new, something vibrant, may, in its own quiet time, sprout forth." He nodded slowly, a deep, inner shift settling within him. "I have been looking for the planting season, Cale, when all along the growth was happening in the quiet heart of the decay itself." Cale, observing this quiet transformation, felt a profound shift within himself as well. He had seen Sage's deep wisdom in the cycles of the earth, and had related to the compost turner's personal feeling of decay without purpose. He had sought for himself a wisdom that would make his life feel consistently productive, consistently growing, always moving forward. He had imagined a path where stagnation or dissolution were signs of failure, things to be avoided or overcome. But in witnessing Sage's quiet discovery, Cale began to understand that even periods of apparent stagnation, of quiet unraveling, of what felt like a personal decomposition, were not necessarily ends. They were vital stages, rich and fertile in their own way. His own initial restlessness, his feeling of a missing, his moments of quiet surrender were perhaps not flaws to be corrected, but essential parts of a larger, unseen cycle. They were the heat in the compost, the breaking down of old forms, concentrating the very life force needed for new growth, new purpose, new understanding to emerge. He realized that true peace was not about avoiding the cycles of decay, but about embracing them, trusting in the hidden wisdom of transformation. It was about understanding that even in the quietest, most seemingly unproductive moments, life was always at work, always preparing, always concentrating its essence for the next, inevitable sprout. This understanding brought a quiet, tender relief to Cale, softening his own internal striving, his own need to always be doing, always be growing in a visible way. He began to see that his journey was not about finding a constant state of bloom, but about cultivating a deeper, more compassionate understanding of all of life's cycles, even those that seemed like an end, for within them lay the powerful anticipation of new beginnings. The sun climbed higher now, burning off the last of the mist, casting the farm in a warm, golden light. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the ancient banyan tree, carrying with it the quiet echoes of the day and the rich, earthy scent of transformation. Cale felt a new layer of understanding settle gently into his heart, a quiet acceptance of the profound wisdom in embracing all cycles of life, even those that seemed like an end. He carried with him the image of Sage's awe-filled eyes, now softened by a quiet realization, and the profound truth that sometimes the most vibrant life is born from the very heart of what appears to be decay. His path continued, now illuminated by this soft, subtle truth of transformation. The path Cale followed now wound gently away from the rich, dark soil of Sage's farm, leading him through fields shimmering with dew, and then, slowly, into a landscape dominated by the quiet, wide expanse of a great river. The air here was cooler, carrying the fresh scent of moving water and damp earth. The river itself was a marvel of quiet power, flowing steadily, endlessly, its surface a mirror to the vast, open sky. It did not rush, it did not roar, it simply moved, a vast, silent current carrying the stories of mountains and forests toward the distant, unseen sea. Kyle found a smooth, sun-warmed stone on the bank, nestled beneath the drooping branches of a willow tree, and settled himself upon it. He closed his eyes, listening to the soft lapping of the water against the shore, feeling the gentle breeze on his skin. The journey had been long, not in miles measured, but in the quiet unfolding within his spirit. Each encounter, each shared story, each moment of observation had been a gentle hand, guiding him inward, illuminating corners of his own heart he had not known were shadowed. He allowed the stillness of the river to settle around him and within him. The image of Kamla, the beetle leaf seller, drifted into his mind, her nimble fingers preparing the vibrant green leaves. He remembered her gentle melancholy, her feeling that her own mouth was dry of joy, even as she brought pleasure to so many others. He recalled the old woman, her face lined with the wisdom of many seasons, who had used Kamla's leaves not for chewing, but for wrapping, for the simple, nourishing act of holding rice. A quiet understanding bloomed in Cale's heart, a recognition of the quiet dignity in selfless contribution. Kamla's leaves, he realized, served a purpose far beyond her immediate experience of pleasure. They nourished, they held, they served in ways she hadn't even considered. And so it was with life, Kale mused. Sometimes our greatest contribution is in the quiet, unseen ways we support and serve, in the subtle threads we weave into the fabric of the world, even when we do not directly taste the joy of that service ourselves. It was a liberation, this thought, a softening of the need for immediate, personal gratification, replacing it with the quiet satisfaction of simply contributing, of simply being part of the larger flow. His thoughts then drifted to Ravi, the pile driver, his powerful frame, his deep, resonant voice. Kyle remembered the rhythmic thud of the hammer, driving foundations deep into the earth, creating stability for others. And yet, Ravi had felt ungrounded, adrift, despite his immense strength. Kale recalled the ancient, decaying pile, pulled from the earth, not dead, not inert, but quietly, miraculously, sprouting roots, becoming a tree again. True stability, Kale now understood with a deeper clarity, was not about being forced into place by external power, not about being driven deep by a hammer. It was about choosing to grow where one was placed, about finding the inner anchor, the organic connection to the earth, to one's own being. It was about allowing the roots to emerge, not from force, but from the quiet, inherent will to grow. Kale felt his own restlessness, his own search for an external anchor, begin to soften, replaced by a quiet, inner sense of rootedness, a knowing that stability began and ended within. The image of Ketu, the tooth puller, then came into Kale's mind. He saw Ketu's deft fingers swiftly alleviating the pain of others, pulling out the source of suffering. And yet, Ketu carried his own unlocatable ache, a pain he could not extract, a suffering he could not name. Kale remembered the grateful patient, returning to thank Ketu, explaining that the gap where the tooth had been still hurt, but differently now, a pain like missing, like an absence, not a sickness to be removed. Ketu had realized his own ache might be an absence, not a presence. A quiet understanding settled in Kale's own heart then, a profound recognition that not all suffering could be pulled out. Not all aches were things to be forcibly removed. Some pains, some deep, quiet longings, were perhaps not problems to be solved, but absences to be understood, to be gently accepted as part of the intricate tapestry of life. His own initial feeling of something missing, that quiet current of unrest, began to feel less like a flaw and more like a space, a quiet, open space that did not need to be filled, but simply acknowledged, and perhaps, eventually, understood as a part of his own unique landscape. And then, his mind, still warm with the recent memory, returned to Sage, the compost turner. He saw Sage's earthy hands, his deep, knowing eyes, his initial weariness, his feeling that his own life was merely decomposing without purpose. Kale pictured the rich, dark compost, steaming with the heat of transformation, and the impossibly vibrant sprout, pushing its way upwards from the very heart of the pile. Sage's profound realization echoed in Kale's memory. That decomposition was not an end, but a concentration of life force, a cradle of new beginnings. Kale felt a deep, tender relief spread through him. He had sought a path of constant forward motion, constant growth, fearing any moment of stillness or unraveling. But now he understood. Even the quietest, most seemingly unproductive moments, the periods of apparent stagnation, of quiet surrender, of what felt like a personal decomposition, were not wasted. They were vital stages, rich and fertile. The heat in the compost, the breaking down of old forms, concentrating the very life force needed for new growth, new purpose, new understanding to emerge. True peace, he realized, was not about avoiding the cycles of decay, but about embracing them, trusting in the hidden wisdom of transformation. These 4 stories, Kamla's quiet service, Ravi's inner roots, Ketu's accepting absence, and Sage's vibrant decay, mingled now within Kale's spirit, weaving new threads into the tapestry already begun. They blended with the earlier lessons he had gathered. Radha's unbreakable resilience, Gopal's living presence, Yasmin's flexible strength, and Dev's rediscovered sweetness of subtlety. Each insight, like a smooth riverstone, had been polished by contemplation, finding its unique place, yet also connecting to all the others, forming a gentle, flowing current within him. Kale opened his eyes, gazing at the wide, gentle river before him. Its surface shimmered, reflecting the moving clouds, the passing birds, the shifting light of the sun. The water itself was in constant motion, ever changing, never the same from one moment to the next. Yet, the river itself remained. Its banks held it. Its course was true. Its flow steady and unwavering. It was always moving, always changing, and yet it possessed an undeniable, profound stillness. A quiet understanding, deep and resonant, bloomed in Kale's heart. His own journey, he realized, was like this river. He had been in continuous movement, encountering new people, new places, new challenges. He had felt the currents of change, the shifting landscapes of his own emotions and thoughts. But beneath it all, an underlying stillness had begun to emerge, a quiet, unchanging essence that was always present, always flowing. His journey was not about finding a final, static destination, but about recognizing this steady, unchanging current within himself, even amidst the constant movement of life. The restless tugging that had initially set him on this path, that subtle ache of something missing, began to soften, to dissolve like mist in the morning sun. It was not gone, perhaps, but transformed. It was no longer a frantic search for something external, but a quiet, gentle recognition of the profound, flowing wisdom already present within him. Kyle felt a subtle shift within his own heart, a quiet settling, a movement closer to peace. The river flowed on, and Kale, watching it, felt a deeper, more profound connection to its timeless, gentle wisdom. He was moving, yes, but he was also still. He was changing, yet he was also simply himself, flowing with the quiet grace of the world. The gentle river, with its timeless wisdom, eventually faded behind Kyle. His path, ever winding, led him now from the quiet solitude of contemplation to a place of soft, murmuring celebration. He arrived at a small village, adorned with garlands of bright, dried flowers and flickering lanterns, a festive hum rising softly into the twilight air. It was a place where stories were told, where ancient tales were spun anew each night, woven from light and shadow. Here, in the heart of this festive village, Kyle found Arjun, the shadow puppet master. Arjun was a man in his early 40s, slender and agile, his movements quick and precise, yet imbued with a dancer's grace. His long, expressive fingers, which would soon bring worlds to life, were never still, constantly adjusting a prop, smoothing a cloth, or tracing patterns in the air. His eyes were bright and intelligent, reflecting the flickering firelight, full of an inner spark that seemed to anticipate the magic he would soon conjure. He wore dark, unassuming clothes, designed to blend into the background, to disappear, allowing his creations to take center stage. Kyle watched him from a distance, drawn by the quiet intensity of his preparations, sensing a familiar yearning beneath the surface of his artistry. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of deep orange and purple, and as the last light faded, the village gathered, A large white screen, stretched taut between two poles, became the canvas for Arjun's art. Behind it, a small fire flickered, its flames dancing, casting erratic, lively shadows. Arjun, now a silhouette, moved with practiced ease. His hands, like magicians, began to dance behind the screen. From the simple cutouts of leather and parchment, from the intricate movements of his fingers, magnificent birds took flight, their wings beating silently across the screen. Fearsome demons roared soundlessly, their jagged teeth and piercing eyes brought to life by the shifting light. Gentle princesses glided across the stage, their delicate forms captivating the hushed audience. The children, their faces upturned, gasped and giggled, completely immersed in the vibrant, ephemeral world Arjun created from mere shadows. Kyle watched, captivated not just by the spectacle, but by Arjun himself. He saw the pride in Arjun's movements, the dedication in his craft, the sheer skill that transformed flat cutouts into living beings. Yet, when the performance concluded and the last shadow had faded, when the applause died down and the children scattered to their homes, Kale approached Arjun. He found the puppet master carefully packing away his creations, his movements now slow, almost pensive. "Arjun," Kale began, his voice soft, "your art is truly wondrous. You bring such life to mere shadows." Arjun paused, a delicate paper bird held between his thumb and forefinger. He looked at it, turning it slowly in the dim light of a dying ember. "Yes," he replied, his voice fluid and captivating, even in conversation. "I create life from shadows. But sometimes, Kale, I feel as if I am merely a shadow myself, insignificant, insubstantial, a whisper that disappears when the fire dies. I spend my life creating images, but I feel a lack of true substance in my own being." He sighed, a sound like the gentle rustle of leaves. "I bring worlds to life, and yet I often feel as if I myself am just a fleeting image, easily erased, easily forgotten." Kyle listened, hearing the quiet ache in Arjun's words. He recognized it too, that feeling of existing on the periphery, of lacking a tangible core, a solid foundation. It was a subtle echo of his own initial restlessness, his own feeling of floating just above the surface of life. He sat in quiet companionship as Arjun finished packing, the silence between them filled only by the distant sounds of the festive night. The next evening, Kyle returned to watch Arjun's performance. The same anticipation filled the air, the same excited whispers from the children, the same flickering firelight casting its magical glow. Arjun's hands, agile and expressive, once again wove their intricate dance behind the screen. A grand adventure was unfolding, a heroic journey through enchanted forests and treacherous mountains. The shadows moved with exquisite detail, each gesture, each subtle tilt of a head, conveying emotion and purpose. The audience was lost in the story, completely absorbed in the ephemeral world conjured by Arjun's masterful touch. Then, without warning, it happened. A sudden gust of wind, stronger than any before, swept through the village. It caught the flimsy shelter protecting the fire, sending sparks flying and embers scattering. In an instant, the main source of light, the very heart of the performance, was extinguished. The space behind the screen, the entire performance area, plunged into absolute, unyielding darkness. A collective gasp rose from the audience. A few small children, startled and disoriented by the sudden void, began to whimper, their soft cries quickly escalating into frightened sobs. The magical world of shadows had vanished, replaced by a bewildering, frightening blackness. Panic, like a cold mist, began to creep into the festive air. Arjun, for a single, fleeting moment, froze. The carefully constructed world he had woven, the vibrant illusion, had dissolved into nothingness. His hands, so adept at shaping light, were now useless in the profound dark. His mind, usually so quick to conjure solutions within his stories, felt momentarily blank. The fear of insubstantiality, of being erased, of being nothing but a shadow, must have threatened to overwhelm him. But then something shifted. It was not a conscious decision, not a thought-out plan, but an instinct, deep and pure. He heard the children's cries, the raw, unadorned sound of their fear in the sudden, terrifying dark. He could not bring back the fire. He could not conjure the shadows. But he could do something else. Arjun moved, not with the deliberate grace of a puppet master, but with the simple, urgent humanity of a man responding to distress. He stepped from behind the screen, no longer a silhouette, no longer hidden by the illusion. He moved towards the sounds of the crying children, his arms outstretched, his voice, usually so captivating in its storytelling, now soft and reassuring. "It is all right, little ones," he murmured, his voice a balm in the darkness. "It is only the wind. I am here." He reached out, his long, expressive fingers, which had just moments before shaped mythical creatures, now gently seeking. He felt the small, trembling shoulder of one child, the tear-streaked face of another. He knelt instinctively in the dark and gathered two small children into his embrace. He felt the warmth of their small bodies, the frantic beat of their tiny hearts against his own. He gently touched their faces, tracing the paths of their tears with his thumb, offering a silent, physical comfort that transcended any story, any image. Other adults began to light small lamps, but in that initial darkness, in that raw moment of connection, Arjun was simply present. In that profound darkness, feeling the warmth of their small hands clinging to his, feeling the soft weight of their heads against his chest, Arjun felt a sensation he had rarely, if ever, experienced with such clarity. He felt real, more real than any shadow he had ever cast, more substantial than any character he had ever brought to life. The insubstantiality he had feared, the feeling of being a fleeting image, dissolved in the tangible warmth of human connection. He was not a shadow. He was flesh and blood. He was present. He was comforting. He was real. The darkness, which had threatened to erase him, had instead illuminated his truest substance. Kyle, watching from the edge, felt a quiet understanding bloom within him, as clear and bright as the newly lit lanterns now beginning to pierce the gloom. He had seen Arjun create worlds from nothing, from mere light and shadow. He had heard Arjun speak of his fear of being insubstantial, of lacking a tangible core. But in that moment, when all the illusions vanished, when the light died and the shadows disappeared, Arjun had not become less. He had become more. He had stepped out of the ephemeral into the tangible. He had moved from the realm of projected images to the profound reality of genuine connection. True substance, Kale realized, was not found in the grand illusions we create, not in the images we project for the world to see, or even in the stories we tell. It was found in the quiet, simple act of presence. It was in the warmth of a touch, the reassurance of a voice in the dark, the unadorned, raw truth of human connection. It was not about being seen, but about being felt. It was about offering oneself simply, without artifice or performance, to another. Kale had often felt his own life lacked substance, a quiet, ungrounded feeling. He had sought to fill it with understanding, with insights, with a sense of purpose. But perhaps he now understood. Substance was not something to be acquired, not something to be filled. It was inherent. It was revealed not in the light, but sometimes, paradoxically, in the darkness. It was in the simple, undeniable fact of being present, of connecting, of feeling the warmth of another's hand, the quiet beat of another's heart. The small lanterns now cast a gentle glow, illuminating Arjun still kneeling, still holding the children. His face no longer obscured by shadow, but clear and present. The performance would not continue tonight, but something far more profound had unfolded. Kale felt a deep, quiet settling within his own spirit. He had sought substance, had yearned for it, but now he understood it was not a destination, but a state of being. It was the quiet, undeniable reality of his own presence, his own capacity for connection, shining brightest when all the lights went out. The journey continued, now with a new resonance in Kyle's steps. The warmth of Arjun's lesson, the undeniable reality of tangible connection in darkness, lingered in his heart like the gentle heat of embers. He carried that understanding, that sense of inherent substance, as he walked away from the festive village, leaving behind the echoes of laughter and the lingering scent of wood smoke. The path, ever winding, led him through valleys where the air hung heavy and still, then up gentle slopes where the wind sighed through tall grasses, a soft, melancholic tune. He noticed the subtle shifts in the landscape, the way the light fell differently on the leaves, the quiet change in the bird song. Each detail, once simply observed, now felt infused with a deeper, more personal meaning. His seeking had not ended, not entirely, but its quality had changed. It was less a restless searching for something, and more an unfolding of something already present. He was learning to feel the subtle currents beneath the surface of life, to listen to the unspoken truths carried on the wind, reflected in the eyes of strangers, or found in the quiet dignity of a stone. The world, it seemed, was constantly whispering its ancient wisdom, and Kyle was, at last, learning to truly hear. He arrived, after several days of quiet travel, at a village that seemed to hold its breath. A hush lay over the narrow lanes, a solemn stillness that spoke of recent sorrow. The usual sounds of daily life, the distant clang of a blacksmith, the cheerful chatter of children, the rhythmic thump-thump of a mortar and pestle, were muted, almost entirely absent. Instead, there was a heavy quiet, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves and, occasionally, the low murmur of voices from within houses, hushed and respectful. The air, typically vibrant with the scent of cooking fires and flowering plants, now carried a faint, almost imperceptible aroma of ashes and something else, something indefinable, yet universally recognized as the scent of loss. Kyle walked slowly, his presence unnoticed in the quiet grief that enveloped the community. He saw figures moving with a measured pace, their faces somber, their eyes downcast. He felt the weight of their collective sorrow, a palpable presence in the very air he breathed. It was a place where hearts were heavy, where the natural exuberance of life had temporarily retreated, making way for the profound, inescapable reality of absence. It was here, in this somber village, that Kale encountered Malini. She was a woman in her late 30s, her presence a quiet anchor in the sea of grief. Her face, kind and gentle, was often veiled by a quiet sadness, not her own, but a reflection of the sorrows she carried for others. Her dark hair was pulled back simply, accentuating the serene, almost ethereal quality of her features. She wore subdued, modest clothing, colors that blended seamlessly with the muted tones of mourning. Malini was the village's funeral singer, a revered figure whose voice was a vessel for collective grief. She possessed a strong, clear voice, capable of weaving laments that soothed the ragged edges of sorrow, allowing tears to flow freely, unburdened by shame. Her songs were not just melodies, they were pathways for expression, a release for hearts too heavy to voice their own pain. Kyle watched her from a distance, observing the profound empathy that emanated from her, how she seemed to absorb the unspoken anguish of those around her and transmute it into a mournful, beautiful sound. Yet, despite her gift, despite her ability to channel and express the grief of countless others, Malini carried a personal burden. She confided in Kyle, her voice, usually so resonant, now a soft, almost brittle whisper, that her own heart felt muted. It was as if, in giving voice to so many others' sorrows, she had lost the capacity to articulate her own. Her personal griefs, unspoken and unreleased, lay within her like still, heavy stones, too dense for her own powerful voice to lift. She could sing for the world, but not for herself. Her throat, a conduit for such potent emotion, felt dry and constricted when it came to her own intimate aches. She yearned to weep, to wail, to release the silent sorrows that accumulated within her, but no sound would come. Kyle listened, his heart open, understanding her struggle. He had often felt a similar muteness within himself, a quiet, unlocatable ache that he could not name, let alone express. He had sought to understand it, to find words or explanations for his own restlessness, but it had always remained just beyond the grasp of language. He felt a kinship with Malini, a shared understanding of the burdens that lay unspoken, unexpressed. A funeral service was to be held the following afternoon for an elder who had lived a long, full life, yet whose passing left a deep void in the community. The air was thick with expectation, the villagers gathering under the shade of an old banyan tree, its ancient roots twisting like gnarled hands reaching into the earth. The family of the deceased sat closest, their faces a tapestry of quiet sorrow and tender remembrance. Malini was positioned at the head of the gathering, her presence a beacon of calm, ready to lend her voice to the farewell. The ceremony began with quiet prayers, spoken in hushed tones, followed by shared memories of the elder, gentle anecdotes that brought forth soft smiles amidst the tears. Then, it was time for Malini to sing. A respectful silence fell, deep and anticipatory. All eyes turned to her, waiting for the familiar, comforting solace of her voice to wash over them, to carry their collective sorrow, to guide their tears. Malini took a deep breath, preparing to draw forth the lament. Her throat tightened. She tried again, a gentle hum, a quiet intake of air. But when she opened her mouth, no sound emerged. Only a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, a mere breath of air escaped her lips. She tried once more, pushing, urging, willing her voice to come forth, but it was gone, muted, silent. The strong, clear voice that had soothed countless grieving hearts had vanished, leaving only a profound, echoing silence in its wake. A ripple of confusion, then concern, passed through the gathering. Malini's face, usually so composed, now showed a flicker of panic, a desperate fear. Her greatest gift, her very instrument of empathy, had failed her. She sat, silent and helpless, her eyes wide with a sorrow that was now acutely her own, unexpressed, unchanneled. The silence stretched, heavy and awkward. Then, slowly, something shifted in the atmosphere. The mourners, who had looked to Malini for solace, now found themselves in a different kind of space. Without the guiding presence of her song, their grief was raw, unadorned. One woman, a relative of the deceased, let out a soft sob, then another, louder, more visceral. A man buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent weeping. Another, a young boy, simply stared at the ground, a single glistening tear tracing a path down his cheek. Malini sat, still voiceless, but now observing. She saw the tears, the trembling hands, the bowed heads. She felt the palpable weight of their sorrow, now shared not through her voice, but through the simple, unadorned fact of their presence together in grief. There was no performance, no song, no beautiful lament to carry them. There was only the quiet, shared experience of loss. In that profound, voiceless moment, a quiet understanding bloomed within Malini. She realized that grief didn't always need a song. It didn't always need to be articulated, to be performed, to be given a beautiful, resonant sound. Sometimes, it simply needed to be. And sometimes, the truest form of empathy, the deepest healing, resided not in the grand gesture, not in the perfect articulation, but in the quiet, heartfelt presence of another. Her voice had failed her, yes, but in its absence a deeper truth had revealed itself. She was still present. Her heart, though mute for her own sorrow, was fully present for theirs. And that, she now understood, was enough, more than enough. Kyle, witnessing this unfolding scene, felt a deep, quiet resonance within his own spirit. He had seen Arjun find substance in touch when the shadows vanished. Now, he saw Malini find profound empathy in silence when her voice, her very tool of performance, failed her. He had often felt the pressure to understand, to articulate, to find the right words for his own unspoken yearning. He had sought grand revelations, profound insights, beautiful truths that could be spoken and shared. But here, in this somber village, in the hushed presence of shared, voiceless sorrow, he realized something even more fundamental. True empathy, true healing, true connection often resided not in words, not in performance, not in the carefully crafted expression of emotion, but in quiet, heartfelt presence. It was the simple act of being there, fully, openly, without agenda or expectation. It was allowing the raw truth of another's experience to simply be, without needing to fix it or explain it, or even give it a sound. It was the silent acknowledgement, the shared breath, the gentle, unspoken understanding that transcended all language. His own restless heart, which had sought so much, now felt a quiet settling. He had believed that for his own sorrows to be valid, they too needed to be articulated, understood, perhaps even sung. But Malini's voicelessness, paradoxically, taught him that his own sorrow, his own quiet aches, needed no sound, no performance, no external validation to be valid. They simply needed to be held gently within the quiet space of his own presence. The world had not lost its beauty or its meaning in Malini's silence. Instead, a new, more profound layer of meaning had been revealed. The quiet dignity of shared grief, the raw power of unadorned human connection, shone brightly in the absence of sound. Kyle felt a deep, quiet settling within his own spirit. He had sought to understand the world, to find wisdom that could anchor his spirit. And now, he understood that wisdom was not always loud or articulate. Sometimes, it was the quietest whisper, the most profound silence, the simple, undeniable truth of being present, fully and wholeheartedly, in the face of life's deepest sorrows and its most profound joys. The quiet, soft weeping of the mourners continued, no longer awkward or confused, but eased, unburdened by the need for a song, finding its own rhythm, its own release. Malini sat among them, her presence a silent, powerful balm. And Kale, watching, felt another layer of his own seeking dissolve, replaced by a quiet, profound understanding of the deep, gentle power of simply being there. With the sun beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of soft lavender and fading gold, Kale eventually rose, a lightness in his step that had not been there before. He offered a silent nod to Malini, whose eyes met his with a knowing, gentle gaze, and then he turned, once again, to the winding path. The journey continued, not with the urgency of a search, but with the quiet purpose of a river flowing towards the sea, each bend revealing a new landscape, each ripple carrying a deeper truth. His path led him now away from the villages, away from the sounds of human sorrow and quiet comfort, towards the rising slopes of ancient hills. The air grew cooler, thinner, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The ground underfoot became rockier, the ascent gradual but steady. Days melted into evenings, and evenings into quiet star-dusted nights, Kyle walking with a newfound patience, his breath settling into a steady rhythm that mirrored the quiet pulse of the land itself. He sought no one now, not consciously. He simply walked, allowing the path to unfold before him, his senses open, his heart receptive. The lessons of the world, he was learning, were not always announced with a flourish or a spoken word. They were often found in the most unassuming places, in the quietest moments, in the enduring presence of things that simply were. And so it was, after several days of quiet ascent, that Kyle came upon a secluded mountain pass. The wind here sang a different song, a low, ancient hum that vibrated through the very stones of the earth. The sky stretched vast and unbroken above him, a deep, endless blue that held the promise of distant, unseen horizons. And there, nestled amidst the scattered boulders and hardy mountain flora, stood an ancient stone. It was not a grand monument, nor a carved idol. It was simply a stone, immense and unmoving, its surface covered in a thick velvety blanket of moss, a rich tapestry of greens and browns that spoke of centuries of quiet growth. Its edges, once sharp, were now worn smooth by the relentless caress of wind and rain, by the countless seasons that had passed over its silent form. It sat there, a patriarch of the mountain, unwavering, unyielding, yet deeply integrated into the very fabric of the earth. Kyle approached it slowly, his steps soft on the rocky ground. He reached out a hand, feeling the cool, silent presence of the stone, the rough texture beneath the soft moss. It was solid, utterly still, a testament to a patience that transcended human understanding. He sat down beside it, leaning his back against its cool, firm surface, allowing its immense quietude to seep into his own bones. The air around him was still, save for the whisper of the wind through the sparse mountain grasses and the distant, almost imperceptible call of a lone hawk circling high above. His eyes closed, and in that deep stillness, the memories of his journey began to stir within him, not as individual stories, but as threads weaving into a larger tapestry. He remembered Radha, her hands strong and calloused, her spirit feeling ground down. He remembered the ancient peppercorns, small and unassuming, yet refusing to break, no matter how much pressure she applied. Their quiet resistance, their inherent resilience, had spoken of an unbreakable core that lay within all things, within all beings, even when the outer shell felt bruised or battered. The stone, too, carried that truth. It had been subjected to the relentless grinding of time, the ceaseless erosion of elements, yet it remained, not diminished, but transformed, its surface softened, its essence intact, a silent echo of those ancient peppercorns. He recalled Yasmin, the reed cutter, feeling stuck, forever at the edges of life. He saw again the image of the reeds in the marsh, bending gracefully, deeply, almost touching the water, yet never breaking. They yielded to the wind's invisible push, then slowly, softly, returned to their upright posture, thriving in that place of constant change. Their flexibility, their adaptability, was their strength. The stone, in its own way, knew this truth. It did not bend, no, but it allowed itself to be shaped by the forces that acted upon it. It adapted by enduring, by integrating the very processes that sought to change it. The wind and rain did not destroy it. They smoothed it, softened it, made it more beautiful in its weathered grace. It met the world not with rigid resistance, but with a profound, unmoving acceptance that allowed it to persist, to simply be, through all seasons. And Ravi, the pile driver, came to mind. He had driven piles deep into the earth, creating stability for others, yet felt unmoored himself. Kyle remembered the old, decaying pile, pulled from the earth, not dead, but quietly, miraculously, having sprouted roots, becoming a tree again. True stability, Ravi had learned, was not about being forcefully driven, but about choosing to grow where one was placed, about finding one's own organic anchors, one's own inner roots. The stone beside Kyle now was the very embodiment of this. It had not been driven into the earth. It had emerged from it, grown from it, become one with it. Its roots were not visible, but they were vast and deep, holding it in an embrace that had endured millennia. It was stability itself, not through force, but through an organic, profound connection to the earth, a silent, powerful growth in place. Kyle breathed deeply, feeling the cool mountain air fill his lungs, then released it slowly, softly. He looked at the stone, its moss-covered surface a testament to enduring life, its worn edges a record of time's passage. It was a teacher, this stone, not through words or stories, but through its very existence. It spoke of steadfastness, of an unwavering presence in the face of all change. It had witnessed countless sunrises and sunsets, innumerable storms and periods of quiet calm. It had seen generations of life flourish and fade, yet it remained a silent guardian, a patient observer. There was a profound peace in its stillness, a truth that did not need to be explained or understood with the mind, but simply felt with the heart. The stone did not strive, it simply was. It did not seek, it simply endured. It did not question its purpose, it simply fulfilled it by its very presence. And in that simple, undeniable being, it held a wisdom that was as ancient and as deep as the earth itself. Cale realized, in that moment, that some truths were not spoken. They were not articulated in parables or whispered in confidences. They were not found in the eloquent words of a funeral singer, nor in the skillful hands of a puppet master. These truths simply were. They resided in the silent strength of the natural world, in the quiet, undeniable presence of a mountain stone that had stood for ages. They were waiting, not to be discovered through effort, but to be felt and recognized in the quiet heart, in the deep stillness that lay beneath the surface of all striving. His own heart, which had sought so much, now felt a quiet settling, a deep, resonant calm. The restless tugging, the yearning for a deeper understanding, had slowly, gently dissolved. He had sought wisdom, and he had found it, not only in the stories of people, but in the silent, unwavering presence of the earth itself. The stone taught him that to be was enough. To simply be present, to be steadfast in one's own essence, to be connected to the profound, quiet flow of life, was the deepest wisdom of all. He sat for a long time, the sun moving slowly across the vast sky, casting ever-lengthening shadows. He felt the weight of the ancient stone behind him, a comforting, grounding presence. He felt the subtle hum of the mountain, the quiet industry of the small insects in the moss, the gentle breath of the wind. All of it spoke a language beyond words, a language of deep, quiet truth. The wisdom he had sought was not a destination, but a recognition. It was not something he could grasp, but something he could embody. It was not a secret to be unlocked, but a presence to be felt. The stone, in its silent, enduring strength, held the sum of all his lessons, distilled into a single, profound, unspoken truth: to be truly present, truly resilient, truly flexible, truly rooted, was to simply be. And in that being, there was an unwavering peace, a quiet strength that needed no sound, no explanation, no grand gesture. It simply was. And Cale, sitting there, felt that quiet being bloom within him, warm and certain, like the sun on his face. The journey had led him, step by step, story by story, to this secluded pass, to this ancient stone. And here, in its silent company, he understood that the path was not just about what he encountered, but about what settled within him, what resonated, what simply was. The stone was not teaching him anything new, but reminding him of truths that had always been there, etched into the very core of his own being, waiting to be rediscovered in the quiet heart. And as the last rays of sunlight touched the distant peaks, painting them in hues of deep violet and fading orange, Cale felt a profound sense of integration, a quiet wholeness that was both ancient and utterly new. He was home, not in a place, but in the quiet, steadfast presence of his own spirit. The sun dipped lower, painting the distant peaks in hues of deep violet and fading orange, and Kyle felt a profound sense of integration, a quiet wholeness that was both ancient and utterly new. He was home, not in a place, but in the quiet, steadfast presence of his own spirit. Yet, the journey was not quite done, for the path still wound before him, and the lessons, though understood, now needed to be woven into the very fabric of his being. He remained by the ancient stone, its silent strength a comforting anchor in the gathering dusk. And as he sat, the separate threads of wisdom he had gathered, like precious fibers from many looms, began to weave themselves together within him, forming a tapestry of understanding that covered his once restless heart. Each encounter, each whispered truth, each silent observation now found its place, not as an isolated lesson, but as an essential part of a greater, unfolding whole. He remembered Radha, the mortar and pestle woman, her hands strong and calloused, her spirit feeling ground down by the constant pressure of life. He recalled the ancient peppercorns, refusing to break, revealing an inherent resilience, an unbreakable core. Cale felt that same unbreakability begin to stir within his own spirit, not as a defiant resistance, but as a quiet, steadfast knowing that beneath all the pressures, all the grindings of life, his own essence remained whole, untouched, utterly resilient. He was not meant to be pulverized, but to endure, just like those small, ancient seeds. The quiet strength of the stone beneath his hand echoed this truth, a deep, silent affirmation of his own enduring core. Then came Gopal, the young cow herder, diligently counting his cattle, yet feeling a persistent void, a missing that numbers could never fill. Kyle heard again the soft, rhythmic breathing of the cows in the dark, a living presence that transcended mere count. And in that memory, Cale felt his own breath, the gentle rise and fall of his chest, not as a mechanism, but as the very pulse of his living presence. He understood that he, too, had often counted his achievements, his tasks, his days, but had missed the profound, simple being of life itself. Now, he felt the richness of simply being, of his own quiet, vibrant presence, a warmth that filled the void Gopal had spoken of. Yasmin, the reed cutter, also came to mind, feeling stuck at the edges of life, longing for depth. He saw the reeds again, bending gracefully, deeply, yielding to the wind's invisible push, then slowly, softly, returning to their upright posture. They thrived at the edge, where flexibility was most needed. Kyle felt a lightness in his own spirit, a subtle release of the rigidity he once held. He recognized that his own journey had been a path of constant change, and that his strength lay not in resisting the currents, but in embracing them, bending with them, finding his balance in the flow. He was not stuck. He was learning to sway, to adapt, to find his own quiet strength in the ever-shifting currents of existence. The pungent aroma of mustard oil seemed to drift on the evening breeze, bringing Dev, the mustard oil presser, to his thoughts. Dev, constantly seeking intensity, had lost the ability to taste subtlety, until plain bread, in its simple sweetness, revealed a forgotten truth. Cale, too, had sought the sharp, the profound, the grand revelations. But now, he felt a quiet opening to the gentle flavors of his own life, the soft scent of pine, the cool touch of the stone, the subtle warmth within his chest. He understood that true richness was not found in overwhelming sensations, but in the patient, appreciative tasting of life's quiet, unassuming sweetness, present in every moment, if one only knew how to perceive it. Kamla, the beetle leaf seller, gentle and observant, yet feeling her own mouth dry of joy, unable to taste the pleasure she provided. Cale remembered the old woman, using the beetle leaves not for chewing, but for wrapping rice, a simple, nourishing act. Cale felt a quiet dignity bloom within him, a recognition that his own journey, his own unfolding, had a purpose beyond his immediate personal joy or sorrow. He was part of a larger weave, a silent contributor, and there was a profound satisfaction in simply offering his presence, his quiet understanding, to the world, without needing to experience the direct outcome of that giving. His own quiet being now felt like a gentle offering. Ravi, the pile driver, powerfully built, creating stability for others, yet feeling unmoored himself. Cale saw again the old, decaying pile, pulled from the earth, not dead, but quietly, miraculously, having sprouted roots, becoming a tree again. True stability, Ravi had learned, was not about being forcefully driven, but about choosing to grow where one was placed, about finding one's own organic anchors, one's own inner roots. Cale felt his own feet on the earth, no longer restless, no longer seeking a distant anchor, but finding it within himself, in the very ground beneath him. He was not a pile to be driven, but a seed that had chosen to root, to grow, to connect, finding his own profound organic stability in the quiet embrace of his own being. Ketu, the tooth puller, with his deft, compassionate hands, ending others' pain, yet unable to extract his own deep, unlocatable ache. Cale heard the grateful patient speak of the missing quality of pain, a pain like absence, not sickness. Cale felt a quiet acceptance settle over the long-held, unspoken aches within his own heart. He understood that not all suffering could be pulled out, not all voids filled by force. Some aches were simply absences, reminders of what had been, or what had never been. And in that understanding, there was a gentle release, a recognition that these absences, too, were part of the tapestry, not flaws to be removed, but spaces for quiet acceptance to reside. The rich, earthy scent of compost seemed to rise from the earth, bringing Sage, the compost turner, to Cale's mind. Sage, feeling his own life decomposing without purpose, had found a tiny, vibrant seed sprouted in the very center of the pile, thriving from the heat of decomposition. Cale felt a deep resonance with this truth. He had once feared endings, feared periods of quiet, of not doing, seeing them as decay. But now he understood that decomposition was not death, but a concentration of life force, a quiet intensity preparing for explosive new growth. His own journey, too, had been a kind of composting, breaking down old ideas, old restlessness, only to find the promise of vibrant, new life emerging from within. Arjun, the shadow puppet master, creating magnificent worlds from mere shadows, yet feeling insubstantial himself. Kyle remembered the sudden darkness, Arjun's instinctive reach, his hands comforting frightened children by touch, feeling more real than ever before. Cale felt the reality of his own hands, the warmth of his own skin, the solid presence of his own body. He understood that true substance was not found in projected images, not in the illusions of the mind or the fleeting forms of the world, but in genuine connection, in the quiet, tangible reality of presence, touch, and heartfelt being. He was not a shadow. He was real, solid, here. And Malini, the funeral singer, her voice a vessel for collective grief, yet her own heart feeling mute, unable to express her personal sorrows. Cale remembered her losing her voice, sitting silent, as others around her wept openly, and the understanding that grief didn't always need a song, but simply presence. Cale felt the quiet power of simply being present, not only for others, but for his own heart. His own sorrows, his own joys, did not need grand articulation or performance. They simply needed to be felt, to be held in quiet, heartfelt presence. True empathy, he realized, was not about words, but about silent, unwavering presence. As each thread found its place, weaving together, Cale felt the restless tugging, the yearning for a deeper understanding, the subtle ache that had once driven him from his village, slowly, gently, dissolve. It was as if a knot, long held tight within his chest, had finally loosened, unfurled, and released its grip. The answers he had sought were not out there, in a distant master or a grand revelation. They had slowly, patiently blossomed within him, nourished by each encounter, each quiet observation, each shared truth. He felt a quiet sense of homecoming, even while still on the path, still sitting by the ancient stone in the fading light. The world around him was the same, the mountain air still cool, the distant stars beginning to prick through the darkening sky. Yet Cale was utterly changed. He was no longer a seeker driven by an unspoken longing, but a quiet presence, anchored, whole, complete in himself. The wisdom he had sought was not a destination, but a recognition of what had always been present, waiting to be seen, waiting to be felt, within the quiet sanctuary of his own heart. He breathed deeply, feeling the cool air permeate his being, then released it slowly, softly, a sigh of profound peace. The journey had led him step by step, story by story, to this secluded pass, to this ancient stone, to this internal synthesis. And here, in its silent company, he understood that the path was not just about what he encountered, but about what settled within him, what resonated, what simply was. The stone was not teaching him anything new, but reminding him of truths that had always been there, etched into the very core of his own being, waiting to be rediscovered in the quiet heart. And as the last vestiges of twilight gave way to the deep velvet of night, Kyle felt a profound sense of integration, a quiet wholeness that was both ancient and utterly new. He was home, not in a place, but in the quiet, steadfast presence of his own spirit. He was not just Kale, the seeker, but Kale, the embodied wisdom, the quiet presence, ready to walk the continuing path with a heart full of peace and a spirit deeply, profoundly at home. Kale stood on a gentle rise, a quiet hill overlooking the vast, breathing landscape. The sun, a molten coin, dipped slowly toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of soft amber and rose, then deepening to fiery orange, and finally, a profound, peaceful violet. He felt the last warmth of its light on his face, a tender kiss of the departing day. The air was still, carrying only the distant whisper of the wind through unseen trees and the faint, sweet scent of drying grass. The journey, he now understood, had not been a path leading to a grand revelation, not a quest for a distant master, nor a search for a hidden treasure. It had been a slow, patient unveiling, leading him, step by quiet step, not out into the world, but deeply inward, into the very core of his own being. The longing, the seeking, the quiet ache that had stirred within him, that subtle current of unrest that had first nudged him from his familiar village, had finally, irrevocably, dissolved. It had not been pulled out like Ketu's teeth, nor ground down like Radha's spices. It had simply, softly, released its hold, like a cloud dispersing into the vastness of the sky. He realized now that the path he had walked, the physical ground beneath his feet, was merely a mirror for an inner journey. The destination he had unknowingly yearned for was not a place on any map, but this very present moment, this breath flowing in and out, soft and steady, this quiet understanding blooming like a night flower in the stillness of his heart. There was nothing more to find, nothing more to reach for. All that he had sought, all that he had believed was missing, was here, now, in the simple, profound reality of his own existence. He looked at his hands, the same hands that had once felt restless, unsure of their purpose. They had carried his small bundle, had reached out in greeting, had felt the rough bark of trees and the smooth cool of river stones. Now, he no longer saw them as instruments of endless seeking, forever reaching for something just beyond their grasp. Instead, they felt like vessels, gently cupped, holding the quiet wisdom gathered from 1,000 subtle moments. They were capable hands, but more than that, they were hands that now knew how to simply be, how to rest, how to feel the warmth of the sun or the coolness of the evening air without judgment or desire. They were hands that understood the unbreakability of Radha's peppercorns, the flexibility of Yasmin's reeds, the rooted growth of Ravi's pile, and the tangible comfort of Arjun's touch in the dark. This profound, personal realization of his own inherent wholeness settled over him, soft as the dusk. He felt it not as a thought, but as a deep, resonant hum within his very bones. His core, he knew now, was unbreakable, resilient, capable of withstanding the grinding pressures of life, and emerging, not diminished, but refined. He felt a deep connection to the quiet, living world around him, to the earth beneath his feet, to the vast, encompassing sky above, to the air that filled his lungs with each gentle breath. He was part of it all, not separate, not observing from a distance, but interwoven into the very fabric of existence. He was no longer Kyle, the seeker, forever looking for answers that seemed to dance just out of sight. He was Kyle, a quiet presence, grounded, like the ancient stone he had sat beside, rooted in the stillness of his own being, peaceful, like the calm surface of a deep, untroubled lake, reflecting the vastness of the heavens, truly at home within himself, not in a house or a village, but in the spacious, accepting chamber of his own heart. The soft colors of twilight deepened into the profound, starry velvet of night. A single star, then another, then countless more, pricked through the darkness, each one a tiny, unwavering beacon in the vast expanse. Cale watched them, feeling no desire to count them, no need to name them, simply allowing their quiet, luminous presence to fill him. He remembered Gopal's shift from counting bodies to knowing living presence, and felt that same knowing now within himself, a deep appreciation for the simple, unquantifiable truth of being. The subtle sweetness of Dev's plain bread, the taste of true subtlety, now permeated his perception. He could taste the quiet sweetness in the evening air, in the silent growth of the earth, in the simple rhythm of his own breath. He saw the dignity in Kamla's selfless contribution, understanding that his own quiet presence, his own newfound peace, was a gentle offering to the world, a contribution that needed no direct outcome to be valid. He understood that absence, like Ketu's ache, was not always a void to be filled, but sometimes a space for acceptance, a part of the whole tapestry of life. And decomposition, like sage's compost, was not an end, but a rich, potent turning, preparing for new, vibrant growth. He felt the promise of that growth within himself, a quiet, fertile ground where new understanding would continue to sprout. The journey of restless seeking had ended. It had reached its natural, peaceful conclusion, not with a flourish, but with a gentle sigh of profound contentment. The outer path, the winding road that stretched before him, would continue. Life would unfold, seasons would turn, and new dawns would break. But Cale's internal quest, the searching of his heart, was complete. It was replaced now by an inner calm, deep and abiding, a quiet knowing that resonated with the silent wisdom of the ancient world. He stood there for a long time, simply being, simply breathing. The cool night air embraced him, the stars twinkled above, and in the heart of Kyle, a quiet peace had finally found its home. He was not just Cale, the seeker, but Cale, the embodied wisdom, the quiet presence, ready to walk the continuing path with a heart full of peace and a spirit deeply, profoundly at home. And in that stillness, in that quiet embrace of self, the entire world seemed to settle, to breathe, and to rest.